Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, your RB Laws, and this is your co-host.
For Wells.
We hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving and a holiday break. We're back in the swing of things with the in-season tournament, some rumors, injury updates, and some narratives swarming around the league. Before we get started with this episode, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yep. So we're gonna get into the in-season tournament, once more. Just obviously because that's the hot new thing in the NBA right
Yeah.
now. And we'll start off with the Orlando Magic winning over the Boston Celtics 113-96. They have now, after today's victory over the Charlotte Hornets, they have won 7 games in a row.
Nuts.
And they're looking like a very legitimate playoff team in the Eastern Conference. And this was a team that we were already, I think, pretty high on.
Yeah.
We liked what they did in the offseason in terms of the guys they drafted. And just they didn't really like bring in a lot of new guys like in terms of free agency, but we still liked what they did, and we already liked a lot of the guys on the roster. But it feels like they're even right now better than we thought. I guess if you look at this box score, right, Paolo Banchero at 23, 7 and 5, 10 of 16, 2 of 6 from 3. Franz Wagner 17, 8 and 6. Right, obviously those two guys leading the way. Mo Wagner with 27 off the bench. Um, this was a game where the Celtics had a couple of injuries. Right, Holiday didn't play because he was hurt. Porzingis, got hurt, and it sounds like he's going to be out for about a week or so. Which that's kind of the concern in trading for him.
Yeah.
So you're not too worried about the loss if you're Boston, but this is more about Orlando. They are also shorthanded as well, where
Mm-hmm.
they've been without multiple starters. Right, Markelle Fultz has been out. Wendell Carter Jr. was out. There was a stretch where Jalen Suggs was out as well, and now he's back and he's playing very well.
Yeah.
And then you look at the two other main guys on the team in terms of Paolo and Franz Wagner. Right, we kind of talked about how at the beginning of the season it seemed like Paolo kind of wasn't playing quite as well, but he's really kicked it up, and
Yeah.
now on the season he's the points per game wise is slightly down, 19.6 from 20 points a game last year, but the efficiency is way up, and that's the thing that's really important. He's shooting about 49% from the field, even 44% from three.
Yeah.
On 3 attempts a game, which is not a lot, and again, 16 games, small sample size, but regardless, the fact that the efficiency has gone way up, that's important because that was kind of the thing in his offensive game that was not really there last year. And in fairness, you don't complain too much about a young player in his rookie season being
Right.
inefficient, especially when you're not on a very good team. But now he's kind of taking more of a leap where the shot's looking better. He's still a good decision maker. The defense still not great, but again, I'm sure he'll get better just because of his size and his physicality and
Yeah.
skill. Um, but overall, again, like in terms of the Orlando Magic's rise, it's been about all these young guys, all playing well and, and guys taking the lead, right? And that's kind of the main important thing here is that, they have a lot of talent. Even a guy like a Joe Ingles, right, has fit in perfectly. And this was a guy where the signing was kind of a surprise. It wasn't really something I expected. It was like a 2 year, I think it was like 20-ish million-dollar deal, right? 10
Yeah.
million a year, which is not really a whole lot. Um, but I was kind of surprised just because of the age, and it didn't really seem like he did a whole lot for the Bucks. But in fairness, he was coming off an ACL tear, but now he's healthy, he's playing, and he's still playing very well. And he's, his passing is something that also is really important for them. And then again, you still have other guys like Cole Anthony, right? Jonathan Isaac off the bench, right? Making an impact. Anthony Black, who's stepping in for Markel Fultz. The
Mm-hmm.
stats look, pretty, low, but the impact is there in
Yeah, for
terms of what
sure.
he's doing, on the defensive end of the floor. So, I mean, you just got to give a lot of credit to this team, and they really do look like a legitimate team.
Yeah.
Um, I'm curious to see, playoff wise, what it will look like. Some of that will be based off the matchup, but and some of that also will be dependent on if we kind of talked about it last time, where if Paolo and Franz, if one of those guys kind of takes a leap in the playoffs, because we've seen it before, where like we'll see like a young guy, in the regular season start playing really well, and then it carries over into the postseason, where like now you see they've arrived, right? Say like a guy like an Edwards,
Yeah.
where we kind of saw him step onto the scene against Memphis a couple seasons ago, right? And now he's better, but like that was his first playoff experience, and you could see he wasn't really scared. He wasn't really afraid. He was able to step up to the challenge. Devin Booker, right, in his
Mm-hmm.
first postseason, right, when they played against the Lakers, right. In fairness, they had some injuries, but he still played very well. And if you can get a version of that in one of Paolo or Wagner in the playoffs, that's where you could potentially win a playoff series. And
Yeah.
obviously, especially if you can get a higher seed, because the Eastern Conference, once you get to the lower half of it, like the Magic shouldn't really be too scared of the lower seeds, right? Obviously, Miami they've kind of slid a little bit, right? And I think when they're healthy, they're still a solid team. They've just been ransacked by injuries. But after that, like, the Hawks, like, they could probably beat the Hawks. I would not saying it would be an easy matchup, but it's certainly a winnable matchup
Right.
potentially. Maybe the Knicks or somebody like that. But again, we still have to see it come playoff time. But they definitely have played very good. And again, the fact that they've won 7 in a row, even while missing a lot of key guys, and not every matchup was super easy because they also beat Denver as well.
Yes. Without Jamal
Even though
Murray, but still.
yeah, without Jamal Murray, but still,
Yeah.
they don't have guys either. So, the Magic have been, probably the most impressive team over the last week or so, just because of what they've been able to do, even without a lot of key guys.
Yeah, and like my thing with the Magic is I think, they're one of the best defensive teams in the league, by far. And I think that's something that's like really underrated about them. Last time I checked, maybe it was like a week ago, they were the best, I think. But, now it's like I'm looking at them and I'm feeling like really good about them because I think if they can figure out the offense and because I think the efficiency is there. I think it's always been there, but the offense itself, if it comes together concretely, I think, this team might be a sleeper team in the East, like to the point where they could be like a low key contender. Because I think they're just so well put together. I mean, they're giving people, and teams run for their money. Paolo's been playing on a very good level, like you were talking about. The efficiency is there. Suggs being back definitely helps. It seems like he treats almost every game like a playoff game. So, and their bench is very deep. I think that's something that people don't realize. Cole Anthony
Right.
commanding the second unit as the PG. It's great. It's magical. No pun intended, actually. And then Gary Harris, I think he's been also fairly good as well. I think he provides
Yeah.
something. The shooting, I think that was a concern for us coming into this season was how consistent are they going to be shooting wise? And I think they've done a fairly good job. Even in this game, they shot 50% from the field and then almost 40% from the 3-point line. So I think they've done very good. The coaching seems to also be a factor as well. I think they've got somebody that they want to play for. I've heard, on various interviews and podcasts that Paolo says he's a player's coach, and I think that's also something that's very underrated and undervalued in the league. But yeah, Orlando is right where I think, not where we expected them to be, but right where we want them to be, because I think everybody wants this team to succeed for sure. I think we're just waiting on one guy to just really pop off, and I think we said this last episode or maybe two episodes ago. We're just waiting for that one guy to really average that 23 points on an efficient clip, and then I think this team is, set to go to the playoffs and maybe even win a round.
Yeah. I mean, offensive rating, they're 21st in offensive rating. They were like bottom 5 like
Yeah.
maybe like a week or so ago because it
Hmm.
was pretty low. It's gotten better over the course of, the last several games. Defensive rating, they're now number 1.
Okay, so they
They've
are number
they've
one.
kind of oscillated back and forth between like 1 and 2.
Right.
Now they're point 0.1 ahead of the Rockets, or I
Okay.
guess below, because defensive rating, the lower the number, the
Right.
better.
Yeah, I get you.
Um, Orlando's 1, Houston is 2, and Minnesota's 3.
Okay.
So, I mean, and in terms of net rating, right? They're sixth in net rating. So I mean, those are things like you said that you like to see, and that kind of translates over to the record they have,
Hmm.
where again, like not only are they winning games, but they're winning, at pretty good rates, right? Like
Right.
um, it's not like I think the Bucks earlier in the season, not so much now, but earlier in the season we talked about their net rating where their record was really good, but their net rating was like close to 0 or
Right.
or if not negative, I think it might have been. Um, but now, with the Magic, yeah, like you said, they're right where we would like them to be. Maybe even a little bit better because
Yeah.
again, the leap that they've taken so far while being shorthanded, that really speaks volumes about like, just the progress that they've made. And once they get all their guys back, it might be scary times, in Orlando.
Yeah, and it's like the thing that I love about this time of year and the NBA season as a whole, things change week to week, because there's so many games during the week. So many teams are playing at the same time. It's not like football or other sports where, there might be a couple of slots and then it's done for the week, but like there's so many games throughout the week. It's like, okay, something's got to give. And them being consistent and wavering between 1 and 2 this early in the season tells me all I really need to hear about this team.
Next up, Suns over the Grizzlies. Grizzlies continue to, slide, in terms of, their record 3-12.
Yeah.
Suns 10-6. Now I believe after tonight's win against the Knicks, where Booker had a game winner, they're now 11-6. They've won, I believe, 7 in a row or 8 in a row if I'm one of those two. It's kind of interesting for them, right? Where they've been able to win games despite being very shorthanded. Which kind of, I guess, is a testament to some of the depth, where we kind of like some of the minimum contract signings, right? Say like a guy like an Eric Gordon.
Hmm.
That's a guy where if you can get him on the minimum contract, that's a really nice get, right? He's played
Right.
very well for them. Other guys like say like a Grayson Allen, even like a Yusuf Nurkic has been relatively solid for them, right? The main thing he's also been healthy. We'll see because again, he's not generally been able to play a full season. Even some other guys like a Josh Okogie. Um, and others. But again, you still have the issue of we haven't seen one game of all their guys play together. That's where because and again, the guy that initially had played all the games before was Durant, but now he's missed a couple of games. Obviously, we know Beal is going to be out for a while. So again, the good news is you're winning games, so that doesn't so that's not hurting you at all. It's just again, when are we going to see all these guys play, and for how long are they going to play? Because at any given moment, one of these guys could just be out for like the next 10, 15 games, and that's kind of always the concern that we've had for them. But again, you still got to win, and you were shorthanded. Although in fairness, Memphis is shorthanded too, but still.
Yeah. The Suns, I think they've surprised a lot of people considering, there were a lot of injury bugs, I think, that hit them very early, in the season. I think people were like, okay, yeah, no shot this team is going to be successful. Kevin Durant can't do it by himself. Devin Booker's going to miss time. Bradley Beal's going to miss time. But, I think, the guys who they've signed, like you said, have really stepped up. Especially, Eric Gordon. And then even like a Nasir Little, I think he's a little bit underrated. Obviously in this game, he didn't play very well. But overall, I think there's been times where, you can see his impact is definitely needed on the court. And even like a Josh Okogie, I know he's not a signing, he's a returning guy, but man, the defense that this guy provides, the rebounding, it's definitely all there. And I think, they're piecing something together that could be special. Just got to see them healthy. That's the problem that I'm really having. It's the one caveat that I have with this team is like, we haven't seen the big three yet. And that it is what it is. I mean, that's kind of what we all expected coming into the season was we weren't, that was the one question. Like, we didn't know how many games all three of these guys were going to play together. But I think, with the bench that they do have, I think there is a possibility that we may have hated on them a little bit too much, but they are where they are. They're 10-6, and I think that's a good spot to be in. And I just don't want them to get too comfortable. I think we do need to see the big three really play together.
Right. Offensive rating, 118. So they're seventh in offensive rating. Defensive rating, they're 13th, which is, better than what you'd expected. But
Yeah,
the other thing is that, again, part of that is, not all three guys have played together. So they've kind of been forced to play some of these other more defensive minded guys. They've still been able to find ways to score.
right.
But because they have these other guys, they've been able to get stops. And that's my question is once Beal, Durant, and Booker all come back and play, some of those guys are either going to get less minutes or they're just not going to play at all. So will they still be able to continue to be able to play, above average defense like they've been able to play? And then obviously, the other thing is the health. But, again, the thing that we did like was we thought that they had a good offseason
Yeah,
because we thought that the minimum contract guys that they signed were better than average. It's just a matter of, again, the main problem is can they stay healthy? And then can they also be able to defend come playoff time? Because I think it's not because I think win wise it hasn't been as rough as some people might have thought. Just because even without one or two guys, they've still been able to find ways to score. And also it's helped that Durant has been the main guy that's been healthy, and he's been playing very well.
yeah,
Right, that's kind of the guy where it's like it kind of hurts to lose him because he's probably of those three guys the best defensive player for sure.
yeah.
Obviously offensively between him and Booker, it's close, but defensively, I think Durant's the best one. Even though
Yeah.
Booker, I think, is a much improved
He's a
defensive
willing
player.
one. Yeah, he's a willing defender. I
Yeah,
think Durant has
exactly. So,
always had that solid defense, but never like, all NBA levels, but to the point where it's like, yeah, his body is probably better equipped to play defense than Devin Booker.
yeah, and they need him to play defense too
Right.
because you know, other than him, you don't have like a lot of bigger. I guess other than him and Nurkic, you don't have a lot of size
Yeah, and wings.
out
Yeah.
there. Like Durant's size is different than like say like a Nurkic, right? Where they're
Yeah.
basically the same height, but Nurkic is a lot bigger.
Right.
In terms of like muscle and strength and everything. But yeah, I mean, again, you always feel good when you're winning a lot of consecutive games because there was a stretch, again, like you said, changing from week to week. A couple of weeks ago, right, their record was below 500. They were I think either outside of the play-in territory or something like that. And we were kind of wondering like what the heck was going on, and that was
Right.
while Booker and Durant were playing. But now they've been able to climb out of the hole, which is and that's the good thing about if you mess up early in the season, you still have a lot of time left, so it's not like you're completely in the gutter. Memphis
Yeah.
might actually be in the gutter. Unfortunately, we didn't talk a lot about them, but I mean, again, they're so shorthanded. They're missing so many guys. Obviously, they still have Desmond Bain and Jaron Jackson Jr., but you need Ja and you need
You
other
need him,
guys. They
yeah.
still don't have enough size. They're basically playing like a Santi Aldama at small forward. And Jacob Gilliard, props to him for being able to make it into the NBA, but again, just being so undersized.
Yeah, he's
It's
tiny.
just
I mean, we
it's
saw him play in summer league. We were like, he's tiny, man.
yeah, it's just hard to compete. And I mean, like, some of the other guys that you would like to see kind of step up and play well just haven't done a whole lot. Say like a
Yeah,
David Roddy, a Kenneth, even like a Kenny Lofton Jr. He's
yeah.
not doing a whole lot.
Zaire Williams.
Yeah, and that's the thing that's pretty brutal because again, like you need some of these guys to contribute. Derrick Rose I think has been kind of a bright spot, but
Yeah, they've been relying
unfortunately.
on him.
Yeah, but unfortunately, it just hasn't been, it just hasn't worked out for Memphis. And we're still kind of a ways away, from Ja coming back. And by that time, it may not matter, because we talked about, last year when the Lakers started off 2-10. Well, that's just 12 games. I mean, like, so even though we all kind of thought that they were probably cooked and in the gutter, you still mathematically would look at it from the perspective of, yeah, there's still technically a lot of time left. But with Memphis that's going to be 25 games in. So you're talking about, basically a third of the season, and there won't be much time left after that.
Yeah,
And, by that point, you're going to be way far behind, right? It's because there's a lot more ground to make up. Especially with the record, they're 3-12, and it's probably not going to be much better by the time Ja comes back, right? Like,
exactly.
how many more games realistically will they be able to win in this next month without him? I mean, are they going to be able to get to 5 wins, 6 wins, 7 wins? If they can
Probably
get
5, maybe 4, in my opinion.
right. Yeah, because I mean that's the thing because you got to be able to survive, while Ja is out, and and it's not just Ja, like other guys are out, like we mentioned, Steven Adams,
Yeah,
amongst other players as well. So I mean, like it's not like it's the whole rotation, but just Ja is out. Like it's brutal. And
yeah,
again, like I said, where are the wins going to come from? Because we talked about it in the offseason when the schedules were first released. Their schedule wasn't the most difficult, but the problem was excuse me, the problem
yeah. You're
was
good.
you had a lot of games where if you had Ja, you could probably win those games. But, and if you had maybe like Steven Adams, you could probably win those games. But
Right.
without a number of other guys, they've dropped a lot of games that they probably could have won, right? Like they lost to Washington. They lost to
Yeah.
Utah, who I think was also kind of shorthanded. They lost to Portland. Um, they lost to I think they beat the Spurs, but I'm just saying like they've had a number of losses where like, man, if Ja was there, they might have been able to pull it out. But
Easily.
yeah, and then like you look at this next stretch of games, like they're gonna play Utah, they're gonna play Dallas, they're gonna play Phoenix. It looks like yeah, they play Dallas twice, Houston twice, Oklahoma City, New Orleans, Indiana. I mean, that's a lot of like good teams. I mean, like, and then the 26th, which I think is around the time he can come back, they play New Orleans. So like there's not a lot of bad teams, in that mix. The only one that's bad is probably Utah. But other than that, like, and they've lost to them already. But other than that, like all these other teams are like good teams where I'm like,
Yeah.
they may not beat those guys. Like they're probably not going to beat those guys, with Ja being out. So like, they might be kind of cooked by the time they get to Ja's return. And like, I'm sure he'll still play.
Yeah.
But like, what do you do from there? Because again, this was a team that was kind of expecting to maybe take a step forward, right? That's why you did the Marcus Smart trade.
Got rid of
But
Dylan
it may
Brooks.
just and he's been hurt too. I forgot to mention, but yeah, but like now you're at a point where like it may just all be for naught, at least for this year, just because. I mean, it's gonna by the time he comes back, they're gonna have, like I said, if they don't win a lot of games, they're gonna have to make up a ton of ground, and
Yeah.
by that point, it may be done. I mean, in fairness, like a lot of the teams standings wise are pretty close to each other, but they're one of those teams that are still ways away from everybody else, right? Because once you get to the bottom of the West, that's where you get to like the Spurs, the Trailblazers, the Grizzlies. Those teams are like at a point where like, okay, there's not a whole lot they can really do to catch up. Like say like a team like a Golden State, even though they're lower, right? They still have time to catch up because they're like 8 and 9. But when
Yeah.
you're 3-12, like that's
It's a different
that's pretty
animal.
tough. Exactly, right? Because Golden State is at 10. They're 8-9. The Clippers are at 11. They're 7-8. So the Grizzlies are, they have 4 fewer wins and they have 5 more losses. And that's kind of the part that matters the most, right? With the losses, because if you're 5 losses behind, like, yeah, even though you're 4 wins behind the Clippers, just because you win 4 in a row doesn't mean you catch up because they would have to win 5 in a they would have to lose 5 in a row, and you would have to win 5 in a row
Right.
just to make it even.
Right.
But they're already ahead of you, and that's probably just not gonna happen. So, a few more losses, like the ones they've been having, and I wonder what the conversation is gonna be. Like, obviously, they're not gonna get rid of any of their young guys,
No,
but
no.
is it possible that there may be, like, some other guys, like, that are on the roster that may just be, like, up for, like, sale or something like that, you know?
Sure.
Like, like, again, maybe one of the young guys who, again, I don't know what their value is. It may not be that high because they haven't played that well. Or maybe you move, like a Adams or, somebody like that as an expire, or, as like some type of, maybe not expiring because I think he just signed an extension, but, something, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I feel like something they're going to have to figure out because I feel like, but again, you may just take the L and just be like, we'll have a lottery pick. I think they have their own pick if I'm not
I
mistaken.
think you're right.
So
Yeah.
we might just, yeah, so we might just have to, eat it this year. What do you
Yeah.
think?
I mean, I think at this point they need to just cut their losses and just throw in the towel. Like, I'm not saying like tank, but I would say just try, see what you can get. I think, as long as you have Ja, I think when Ja comes back, I think you'll see the team turn around somewhat, but it'll be a case of, a little bit too late. Simple as that. And I think that's something that we really touched on early on, when the suspension came out. We weren't really feeling too horrible about, them playing without Ja, but that was like the roster, fully constructed, fully healthy. We didn't have a problem with it. But then once the guys, it was revealed that some guys weren't coming back because of injury, it's like, okay, well, now we're in deep trouble because, we got guys playing out of position, way out of position, where it's like clearly these guys don't play these positions. We have to pick up guys who don't really work. Like, I don't think Biombo is a starting caliber center in the NBA, in my opinion. Triple J is definitely not, a center either, and we saw games with him at center as well. And then Bane, I feel like it has had to do a little bit too much, in my opinion. But
He's played
regardless,
well. Yeah,
yeah,
he's played well, but he's doing more than you would like for him to do.
exactly. Like, we know his role. Like, he's a great player, and I think he's easily capable of having, a great season. But at the same time, I feel like he's better when Ja's there because I think he's a great spot up and he's also a great shot creator. Not so much the best playmaker sometimes. I think there's a little bit of issues with that sometimes. But regardless, I think Memphis is just cooked. So I would just say you just gotta play your heart out and see what happens. Hopefully, you I wouldn't even say hopefully you make the playoffs because I don't think that's a possibility. I think that's out the window. So I would say hopefully you get a decent draft pick. You use that draft pick on somebody who's NBA ready, and maybe you have a season like the Kings did last year. I don't know, but who knows what this team will do? They just got to get healthy, in my opinion. That's what it really
Yeah,
comes down to. Just wait it out, get
yeah,
healthy, and get that draft pick.
yeah. Desmond Bain, he's averaging 24, 4.5, and 5, which,
Yeah.
those are career numbers.
Mm-hmm.
But again, then you look at the efficiency, right? 45 from the field when he shot 48 last year,
Right.
36% from three when he shot 41% from three last year. And that, like you said, that kind of goes back to the idea of like if you got this version of Desmond Bain with Ja, right, then that'd be way better because then the efficiency's
Yeah.
higher.
Probably less
You know,
turnovers too. I mean,
yeah,
I know it's a
yeah,
career high for turnovers, not by much, but
right. And like you said, that's the thing is like now you're relying on Jaren Jackson Jr. and Desmond Bain to probably just be more than what they are.
right.
And they are, like you said, they are very good players. When they're surrounded by a guy like a Ja Morant who makes the game easier for them. But then when you kind of ask them all of a sudden to take a more take on a more just detailed or just more extensive role, that's rough.
Desmond
Look at
Bain
Jaren.
can't be number one option.
Yeah,
Simple
look
as
at
that.
Jaren Jackson Jr.'s numbers, right? 19 and a half a game, which is a career high. But the blocks, he averaged 3 last year. He's down to 1.5.
Yeah, it's not good.
Yeah, 6 rebounds, which is okay, but 42% from the field and 29% from three. That's just rough.
Yeah,
It's like you almost don't even realize he's out there. Like, cause I remember, that in-season tournament game between the Lakers and the Grizzlies where I almost didn't even know he was out there. Like,
yeah,
that's how bad he was.
I
Like,
feel
and
you.
again, like,
And I
and
saw
it's not his
the
fault.
Wizards one in person, and I was like, I completely forgot this guy was in the NBA. That's how bad it was. Because like this is the former Defensive Player of the Year, and he's out there like a ghost. I'm like,
Yeah,
who's stopping the Wizards? Nobody.
right. Yeah, he was the defensive player of the year last year. And again, it's not all on him. It's not all his
Right,
fault.
right.
Happens when you're shorthanded and so many other guys are out. But man, like I said, that's the negative part, of having all those guys out is you need these guys to step up, but they're just
Yeah,
not going to
man.
be able to quite do that. And it's not their fault. it's just kind of the reality of the situation. But yeah, it's getting pretty close to you might have to throw in the towel. The
You
players
have
are
to.
not going to do that. I don't think, those guys are still going to play hard. They're still going to compete. But,
Right.
I feel like internally they probably know, like, yeah, this is probably cooked.
Yeah, they're just waiting for Ja to come back, and I think they're just doing their jobs, but simply, the West is just that good, and they're just going to lose probably a lot of games because, I mean, they're going up against teams that are clearly better than them, and that may be the
Right.
worst teams in the league just because of who's on the roster. Like, I don't think it's like a crazy concept, and I think like you said, the players know that, and Ja knows that, the entire coaching staff knows that, the organization knows, the fans even know. I think everybody knows they're done. It's just what
Right.
are you
Yeah.
going to do about it?
Because I'm sure there was a lot of optimism going into the season, but like
Oh
that
yeah.
optimism's probably got to be gone now. I
Yeah,
mean,
I
like
know a
it's
lot of people don't like where they are. Simple.
Yeah. Like I said, it's rough just to see, because again, obviously, it felt like that they were up there, they were on the rise. And, I think they'll eventually be back. It's just, again, how long is it going to take? It's not going to be this year, I don't think.
Yeah.
And,
No.
again, like, yeah, and the windows are, typically a little bit shorter than you think. Like,
Hmm.
we'll talk about a team where it's like, oh, these guys will have like, this will be like one of the best combos for the next like 10 to 15 years. The contention window is not always that long. And I
Right.
feel like Memphis, when you make a trade like the Marcus Smart trade, you're trying to go into, all right, now we're going to try to contend, because they were already a really good team. They're just trying to get better. But it's
Yeah.
like, now you're a couple seasons in, and some of the guys that you've heavily relied on, some of those guys are gone, right? Like a Kyle Anderson or a Tyus Jones, or some of these guys are
Yeah,
just not the same
Tyus is a
players.
big deal. That's something that like I haven't heard a lot of people talk about. Like I think last year Tyus was arguably the best backup point guard in the league, and to lose that, and now you look at who's really commanding your second unit. Like Derrick Rose is great. Like I know we all love Derrick Rose, but at the end of the day, I just don't think he's a Tyus Jones, and you can clearly see. And even like just looking at the roster, it's like some of these guys, like, are they really even NBA ready? Like Gigi Jackson, I mean, I think he's more of a project at this point, but he's getting some minutes out there. It's not like, 10 or 15, but he's out there. And then, I'm not a big fan of David Roddy or any of those guys really. And that's not like me hating, but it's like I just don't think they can win a lot of games if, you're relying on David Roddy to play, a, almost 30 minutes a night
Yeah,
alongside, the other guys.
when when the Grizzlies were playing against the Lakers in the playoffs
Yeah.
last year and David Roddy was out there, I felt relatively fine. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? Like,
Tillman, guys like that. It's like, okay, you could feel good when Anthony Davis has those guys on him and stuff like that. And I feel like, just look at who they played. Like even Phoenix. This is a game where I don't even think Durant played in
he
this
didn't play
game,
at
right?
all.
Yeah. So it's like, I
They
mean,
blew
come
him
on. I
out.
mean, they got cooked.
Yeah.
110-89, and it's like Phoenix was shorthanded too.
Yeah,
But
exactly. No
but
Durant,
Phoenix
no
is such
pressure.
a better constructed roster, and obviously Phoenix is with their best player in Devin Booker, and Memphis is without. That's all it comes down to.
I mean, it's rough. Moving on, Knicks Heat.
Oh boy.
Knicks 100, Miami 98. This
Yeah.
game was wild in the sense of the Heat were beating the brakes off the Knicks for a good chunk of the game. I believe they were up by as much as 21. And
Yeah.
in the fourth quarter, they scored 11 points to the Knicks 30 or
Hmm.
29, and the Knicks ended up stealing the game.
Yeah.
Julius Randle with 13, 8, and 7, 5 of 12. So, you know how it is. Jalen Brunson, right, continues to play very well, 24 points, only 3 assists, 3 rebounds, although some of that was just because the Knicks didn't necessarily play that great offensively either until the fourth quarter. Um, RJ Barrett with a solid game, right? 18 and 7, with an assist, right? And then the bench, right? Emmanuel Quickly, Josh Hart, right? Josh Hart, now has kind of been moved back, to the second unit because, I think RJ Barrett was out with a migraine.
Yeah.
So now he's back. So now you're kind of, filling in the roles a lot better. So again, I don't, the Knicks are 9 and 6, so they've played relatively well.
Hmm.
And obviously, you like to get a win. But at the same time, I don't know how to feel about the Knicks because again, like I think that they're solid. I think last year, right? They had a pretty good season, obviously, given what the expectation was. But it doesn't really feel like they've really improved by a whole lot. Like again, 9 and 6 is solid. They just, if I'm not mistaken, they just lost. Against the Suns. We just talked about it. Earlier. So
Yeah.
now they're 9 and 7 or whatever. Or I guess yeah. So I mean, either way, like I said, I just think the team is fine. Like they're not bad at all. They're
Mhm.
solid. I just feel like they're not quite in that other tier, that upper tier of Eastern Conference teams. And again, I think they know that. I think for the most part, they're just kind of biding their time, because they have a decent amount of assets. So my guess is that they're just kind of holding on, with the roster, just kind of waiting for the next star, to kind of ask out, or something, and then they can kind of jump right in and be one of the first, people at bat, right? Like, they
Yeah.
tried to get Donovan Mitchell, it didn't necessarily work out. But there will be other guys, I think. And if somebody's there, the Knicks will be somewhere towards the top of the list. And if they can pounce, right, that's where you can kind of get something cooking. I think their hope initially might have been, Joel Embiid, but the Sixers have played pretty well. So
Oh,
obviously, I don't
Joel
think
ain't
there's any.
going nowhere.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think there's any chance of that, at least right now. But again, what do you think of the Knicks?
I mean, like the Knicks are such a weird team. They're in such an odd position. I feel like they're kind of like for anybody who watches football, they're kind of like the Steelers, where it's like they win some games, but most of the time that they win games, it's ugly. It's not the prettiest. Jalen Brunson, I think his efficiency has been a little bit down. Um, Compared to last year, which is fine because I mean, you've got R.J. Barrett, who I think has been playing very well. The efficiency is up for him. I think it's career levels of efficiency for him, especially from three. I think he's been very good, on limited attempts. But regardless, I think this is a great year for them to showcase who they've got and who they need to commit to super duper long term.
Yeah.
Julius Randle's out of there, bro. I think he's got to go. He hasn't played that well. Horrible from the field. But I think we all know that that's kind of been his game, for a
Yeah,
while.
but
And I mean, you're a Lakers fan, and like you guys drafted him, and I know you guys moved on from him kind of swiftly, in my opinion. But I think that was rightfully so, because I think his game is very limited in terms of what he can do, especially come playoff time, because it's pretty much just ISO, just a big ISO guy. And it's like that can only get you but so far, especially if you're not hitting. That's the problem. But I think they do have some great pieces around them. Josh Hart, DiVincenzo. I'm not too like angry about that. I think I like that. I think I like the bench more than the starters at this point, and that's kind of a bad thing to say. I think about a team that has
yeah,
playoff aspirations, and for a team that did pretty well last year. I thought in the
yeah.
playoffs.
The bench,
So they've taken a step back, in my opinion, from what I've seen
yeah.
so far.
The bench is what got them back into the game. I
Yeah.
mean, you look at the plus minuses, which again, like I said, in fairness, even though I always bring them up, they don't always tell the whole story.
Right.
But for Emmanuel Quickly, plus 22 in a game they won by two, right?
Right.
Isaiah Hartenstein, plus 18 in a game they won by two.
Right.
Then you look at the starters, Julius Randle, minus eight. Mitchell Robinson, minus 17, right? Even Brunson, right? Minus six.
Right.
RJ Barrett, plus nine, right? So we know he had a solid game. Quentin Grimes, minus 20 in just 20 minutes. I mean, like, and
Yeah.
again, in a game they won by two.
Right.
So, that's kind of telling you something there. In terms of, like you said, the bench for the Knicks, they have a lot of guys, and there are even other guys who are on the roster who don't even play.
Yeah.
Just kind of, like a Evan Fournier is just sitting there, kind
Yeah.
of waiting to be traded. It's because they're not going to play him.
No.
But I mean,
It's like the same thing with
like,
Bertans. Like they're not
yeah.
gonna play Bertans over there.
And then you look over at the Heat, right? The Heat are kind of intriguing because that's a team, that started off the season, kind of shaky, where they weren't playing that great.
Hmm.
Um, I think they were like what 1-4, 1-5, or something like that, right? And then they picked it up. They went on like a 16. Why did I say 16? My bad. Like a 7-game win streak.
Yeah.
Um,
I
and I mean,
understand. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And then we're like, oh wow, they even lost Tyler Hero during that winning streak, but they were still, winning games left and right. So this was a bad loss in the sense of like, there's no way you can blow a 20-point lead,
Agreed.
um, like that. I mean, but at the same time, like they're also kind of shorthanded. Where like, in this game they had Lowry, they had Butler, and Adebayo. But then there were other games that they lost where like, they didn't have anybody. Like in the last game they played, I think Butler and Bam were both out, and it's like, injuries have kind of plagued them as well. Where it's like, you know, the record now is solid, so you can kind of withstand it a little bit. But it would also be nice if you're the Heat to be able to have all your guys back because we've kind of seen when like all their guys are playing and they're playing well. This is still a good team.
Yeah.
And again, they've been able to kind of plug in some of the holes, relatively well. To like a Josh Richardson, he stepped in, he's played relatively well. Jaquez Jr., right, the rookie that they drafted, he's played great for them. He's been, playing a lot of minutes, but in those minutes, he's played, he's been great,
Yeah.
right? I think he's averaging 11 a game, 50 from the field, like almost 40 from three, basically giving them exactly what they need. Even though, like, say, like, Caleb Martin, right? He's kind of had a down year, but again, you've been able to make up for that with Jaquez. You haven't really missed Vincent and Struess too much, just because again, those were guys that did play well for them in the playoffs, but just not so much in the regular season.
Hmm.
And again, that's kind of why the Heat are the Heat. In terms of like they somehow always seem to be able to find guys, and just come out of nowhere and just kind of contribute.
Yeah,
And some of the guys we liked the Jaquez Jr. pick.
absolutely.
Um, we liked a couple of the signings they had, even though we did say that they had a horrible offseason. But I did after a while as we got closer to the season, I felt better about them. I feel like the initial thing for them in terms of not getting Lillard has kind of gone away.
Absolutely.
I still feel like come playoff time, it's still kind of rough because like their offense is even though their offensive rating isn't too bad, they're pretty close to the bottom in terms of points per game. They just cannot score
Yeah.
effectively. And again, it's hard when you don't have Tyler Hero, considering he was averaging 25, 5, and 5.
Hmm.
And again, that allows guys to be slotted into other roles a lot more effectively.
Yeah.
But even so, like at the same time, is he going to be able to do that in the playoffs? Because so far, his playoff numbers typically drop. So I mean, now in fairness, he's played very well the regular season. So maybe the drop, if it's not quite as bad, you'll be okay. But at the same time, it's like he didn't even play for them in the playoffs at all, and they still got to the finals. So if you can get a better version of Tyler Hero in the playoffs, that might help. But the main thing is right now they got to get healthy. But again,
Yeah.
it's been better than I would have expected because the record, their record is pretty good. I mean, again, all things considered, again they've been missing a lot of guys for a number of games. They're 10-7, and while it could be better, right, it should be 11-6 with that Knicks loss, being pretty bad.
Yeah.
But either way, you can't complain too much because again, they're about where I thought they would probably be in the standings after, like I said, some thought about the Lillard thing, where I'm like, they'll probably be, they won't be a top 4 seed, but they'll probably be somewhere like in that mix of like, somewhere between like 5 to 8.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of both where we stood, especially like you said, after the whole Lillard debacle. But that was really just predicated on the fact that it was a match made in heaven. But the Bucks is also a match made in heaven, clearly. But with Miami, I'm not really sure how to take this. I think this is just kind of like a fluke and a bump in the road. Honestly, I think they'll be great. I think they'll be better than New York. I think come playoff time. So I'm not
Yeah,
really worried about them because I think they have a solid culture established clearly.
great.
And then Bam is definitely playing, the basketball
The
of his
best.
life. Yeah, so
Yep.
the best basketball of his life. So, and Jimmy, he seems to be, on track and doing, the things that he normally does in the regular season, just giving you 20 and doing all the other dirty work. But,
Great
really,
coach.
I think everybody else who's, come along has done a great job of replacing the guys that they did lose because we were very worried, in terms of Struess, especially Gabe Vincent, other guys like that. But, they've really stepped up to the plate and no real complaints except for this game so far, honestly, because I just don't understand how you can lose. But at the same time, I do understand because I'm a Wizards fan and I think we blow 20-point leads every game.
Yeah, and we'll actually talk about that in a little bit, but we're not there yet.
Yeah,
So next up, Raptors Bulls. Don't really want to say a whole lot about this game. The Raptors won
sure.
121-108. The Bulls are bad. The Raptors are mediocre. That's kind of the main takeaway that I have here.
Yeah,
I mean,
I feel you.
yeah, we've talked about it a lot, right? Where I don't think we were the biggest fan of either of these teams.
Mm-mm.
Both of these teams have talent, but it's just like at the same time, it just seems like it hasn't worked together that well. The Raptors, they can't shoot. The Bulls, they just seem like they can't play. Like in the
Right.
sense of like they just for whatever reason, it's just not working. And again, they don't have bad basketball players. They
Right.
have some solid players,
Yeah, they have
but
hoopers.
for whatever reason, it just hasn't worked. And then, like I said, with the Raptors, kind of a similar thing where you have some solid players, they just haven't been good. They can't shoot. The Bulls, they can't really defend like that. So I mean, I don't really know what to say. It's just again kind of the battle of the mid.
Yeah, that's the best descriptor. Battle of the mid. Like that's all you can really say. And it's like some guys they went off this game. I feel like we do have to give them their props. Levine at 36 in a
Yeah,
loss, so it doesn't really mean as much, I think. And then OG Anunoby at 26. But it's like I don't walk away from this game like clapping or like feeling good about either of these teams. They're still going to be garbage by the time the season ends. So don't want to pile on, but I mean it's bad, and I think everybody who watches NBA basketball knows that both of these teams don't have a lot going for them this season. But It's not danger zone territory where it's like the Grizzlies, because I think the Grizzlies one is a little bit different. Because I know we did spend a decent amount of time on the Grizzlies, but I think that's because they've been so bad to the point where like we don't even know what's gonna happen in the future. Like
And there's
we know what the Bulls and Raptors kind of have in store for them. Like, you know what I mean? Because
yeah.
there's also factors that come into play, like Lonzo being out, and then Toronto kind of mismanaging their assets. It seems like, and just dangling things for no reason. So I don't know, but yeah, both those teams suck in my opinion.
Next up, another horrible team, Detroit
Yeah.
113
Oh my God,
lost to
Detroit
the
is
Indiana Pacers
trash.
136. The Pacers have been killing it. 9-6. We've talked about them obviously
Yeah.
before, where obviously they got one of the best offenses in the league, right?
Mm-hmm.
Tyrese Halliburton has been on another level just in terms of the decision making, the control, the feel of the game, right? Along with the ability to shoot and score, and everybody else kind of being able to play off of that, right? With a ton of guys playing very well for them. They have a ton of options. Like I said, the main thing for them is, are they a team that maybe becomes a buyer at the deadline where they try
Mm-hmm.
to like maybe, ship off some of these other guys who aren't even really playing that some other teams might want, maybe like a TJ McConnell, or somebody like that, or one of those other role players, and maybe you bring in somebody who can defend a little bit. Again, it doesn't have to be a major move because I don't think they're quite there yet. But either way, I do kind of want, But again, we had discussed it before, and I think they should at least consider it. Again, obviously there's a danger in going too far in too early, and I don't think they
Sure.
should do that. But again, I think they have a couple of contracts where it's like maybe you can move a couple of those guys, and because there are teams that I think would want a guy like a TJ McConnell on their
Oh,
team,
for sure. Yeah.
or again, even somebody like one of those other young guys that they have. Buddy Hield now he's been starting, so maybe he doesn't get traded now. But either way, they have a lot of options. I think it's a good year to be a Pacer.
Yeah.
Not it's a great time to be a Pacers fan.
Yeah, and it's like they have so much leeway. They can do whatever they want, honestly, clearly. They've seemed to be winning games, or not seemed. They're obviously winning games. And they're doing it efficiently. Obviously, on the offensive end, I think defensively is where we have a little bit of questions. But at this end of the day, it doesn't really matter because they're able to outscore their opponents every time. So if you're, able to outscore your opponent every time, it doesn't matter what kind of defense you play. Maybe, not the most orthodox basketball where, everybody has a designed role on defense, but at the end of the day, they're blowing teams out. Like, they're just cooking. And sometimes, that's all that you really need. And I mean, like you said, it was against Detroit, who is, very, very, very bad. I think that's another franchise where we're sitting there like, what is the direction? Like, because they're just gonna keep accumulating all these talents and these high level picks, but you gotta pay these guys at some point, and guys are not playing that well. Like Kate Cunningham, in my opinion, has been in a very weird slumpy area. Jaden Ivey, I just don't really know what Detroit's gonna do. And I'm sorry that I even went on that tangent because I don't even think we need to touch on them too much. But yeah, I love what Indiana's doing. Unfortunately, not a big fan of the Pacers. But yeah, Halliburton is one of those guys. Like he might be, the best point guard in the league right now. I don't know. I don't want to go out there and say that right now because there are some really good PGs, but he's definitely in the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, again, yeah, we don't have to spend too much time on Detroit. Kind of like what we said about
Yeah,
Chicago.
yeah,
They're
yeah,
bad.
yeah.
They made a rotational change where now Killian Hayes comes off the bench and they
Joy
started Javen Ivey. Still bad.
still can't
Um,
win.
yeah, I mean, again, and like they have some talent. It's just again, it's just some of it just isn't working. But we'll see again. Like this is not a team that I expected them to be better, but at the same time, like it doesn't surprise me that they're bad. I guess I'm surprised that they're this bad, but they also have had some other guys missing in fairness, but don't have to spend too much time on that one.
Yeah.
Next up, Rockets Nuggets. The Rockets blew out the Nuggets 105 to 86. Um Denver's kind of gone on a little bit of a slide. They just picked up a win against the Spurs. It is the Spurs who are also very bad. Now, it seemed like they were kind of able to, sort of hold on with the Jamal Murray thing, but it
Mhm.
seems like now they've really had some troubles really like generating offense, which makes sense, right? Because he's their second best offensive player. And again, like, when you're with those second units, like he can kind of be out there and he can kind of like, just be another guy that you can kind of run some offense through and it makes it easier for everyone else. But again, holy moly, that bench just has not been that effective for them.
Right.
And this was, and earlier in the season, I was kind of the mindset that they might be better this year than they were last year. And obviously, there's still time, for that to play out. But it definitely feels like the Jamal Murray injury is hurting them, a lot more than I would have thought.
Yeah.
Reggie Jackson, after kind of initially playing relatively well, he's kind of gone back into a little bit of a slump. He was 1 for 7 in this game with 2 points, minus 26, which is, not very good to say the
Tells the
least.
story.
Um, yeah, so I feel like they made a couple of adjustments. Like in the Spurs game, they actually played DeAndre Jordan. They
Mm.
just kind of just kind of lifted him out from the depths of like just the bottom of the bench,
Yeah.
and he stepped in and kind of made an impact. I mean, again, it's been rough. Zeke Naji, right, is a guy that just hasn't played very well. That's a guy that I think they just gave him an extension, so you would have hoped to have gotten more out of him, and maybe there's some better days in store for him. I still feel like Denver probably will have to make a decision in terms of like, maybe some type of smallish trade, just to get another bench guy. Because again, I'm still just not sure how well some of those guys will be come playoff time. I mean, there's a couple of guys where I think they're fine, but at the same time, all you could still say like, well, once Jamal Murray comes back, it won't be a problem. I don't think it's necessarily a concern,
Mhm.
but it's still just something to think about because you still feel like some of these games that they lost, you feel like they probably just shouldn't have lost, but they can't score with some of these groups.
Yeah, that's the problem, and I feel like like as good as Jokic is, I think he's not, Superman. He needs his Robin. He's pretty much Batman, and he just needs a Robin. And I think, without Jamal Murray, he's not going to be able to get the job done. Clearly, I think we've seen that over the years as well. So this doesn't really come as a surprise to me, for them being horrible or horrible as of recently, getting blown out and losing to certain teams that we know that they're better than. But Jamal
Yeah.
Murray, I think just him being out is just really what's hurting this team. And I think you hit on all the points. There's not really much for me to say on Denver, but I will say for Houston, I've been thoroughly impressed, surprised, and very happy. It seems like they've done a lot to bring the best out in some of their guys. I think Jalen Green had a great bounce back game. And it's, from what I saw in this game, I liked a lot of things that they do. That they're seemingly taking the thinking part of basketball out of Jalen Green's, hands and putting that more in Van Vliet's hands, where it's like, okay, yeah, Van Vliet and Sengun can, do everything pretty much, in terms of playmaking,
Yeah.
passing, shooting. But Jalen Green is kind of just there to, be the athlete that we know that he is. He has the hops, he has, the finishing ability, and I think he's somewhat developing a jump shot. Who knows? But it seems like they've created a system where a lot of guys are getting some quality looks, and I think this shows that this team has a lot of talent, and they've always had the talent. It was just a matter of cohesion and coaching. So I've been really impressed with Houston and what they've done, especially Sengun too. He's been on another level.
Right, he's essentially been their best player this season.
Hmm.
And again, we talked about in terms of Houston, we did like what they did in the offseason. We weren't necessarily sure if that was going to lead to amazing results. But they've, like you said, they've been great. They've been one of the best defensive teams, and that's been
Yeah,
key as well, right? Because they were a joke, on that end of the floor. I mean, obviously offensively they were a mess, but like, defensively it was just
it
atrocious.
was just
I
as
mean,
bad.
they didn't
Yeah,
have a lot of great defensive players, but also just it didn't really seem like there was any real strategy or plan. And I think, like I said, that's definitely part of that is definitely a credit to the coaching staff because they've been able to, like you said, get the best out of the young guys. The front office obviously deserves credit as well for bringing in some of these other guys like a Van Vliet, like a Dylan Brooks. Um, because again, like they're just guys that are veterans and they've been in the league for a little bit. And again, even though Brooks can be kind of a wily guy, right? At the same time, like he is still a solid NBA player.
yeah,
And even Van Vliet, for the issues in terms of his efficiency, he's a solid player as well. They're just, like, and Van Vliet does also have the reputation of a guy that people like to have in terms of the locker room
oh
and the
yeah,
culture So like that's the other part too is that it's a much more professional team, and that combined with some of the other younger guys, having more structure, I think also, which is helpful for them, like more
yeah,
defined roles where like now they actually know like what they're doing and what they're supposed to do, right? That helps as well. So when you
right.
get good veterans combined with, improved play from young guys, especially like you mentioned, Alperen Şengün, that's how you get a formula for a much better team, which is again, like you said, good to see because it does seem like they did everything that we wanted them to do, right? Because like when we talked about it, when those initial weird rumors of Harden, came out about him going back to Houston, I'm like, you don't want to do that.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
even with as talented as he is, right? Like just go out and just get some other veteran guys and just kind of build that way. and then, just kind of see what you can do, and again, like I think that was ultimately the right decision. Obviously, you may still feel like, okay, they do kind of lack a guy that you would like to go to like consistently late in games. Because, like even like, a guy like a Van Vliet, he's just not consistent enough
Right.
offensively. Same with Jalen Green, right? Where it's just like, he's also a guy where, again, like you said, he had a bounce back performance, but he's still not at a point in his career yet where you know what you're getting with him, every single game. He's not
Right.
quite there yet. So that can be a problem with them, and that would probably be a problem with them come playoff time or play in time, whatever that may be. But either way, for the regular season, like it's a good team. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like we've definitely seen a proof of concept now, like you said, where this is a good team, and like you said, this taught us more. This game showed us more about the Rockets than the
Yeah.
Nuggets, like you said, because
Exactly.
we already know what the Nuggets are and what they're capable of when they're healthy. But with the Rockets, right, we weren't really sure of what to expect going into the season. But now through the first, 15 games or so, we can see this is a solid basketball team. This is a good
Yeah.
basketball team. Again,
Exactly.
ultimately, will they be one of the final 8 teams? Maybe, but I don't know. But at
They're
the same
likely to
time,
fall out.
yeah,
That's all
but
I'll
at the
say.
same time, yeah, they have a way better shot than I would have thought.
Oh yeah.
Because going into the season, I would have given them a really low chance just because I felt like, well, the Western Conference is so good, but they have a chance. Like you said, they may be one of those teams that ultimately falls off as some of these other teams kind of come back up and get things
Mm-hmm.
together. But either way, if you're the Rockets, all you ask for is a competitive season. You know what I mean? Because again, they
Yes.
don't even have their own pick. It goes to Oklahoma City. So the worst thing that could happen, is you fall out of the playoffs and then Oklahoma City ends up with the lottery pick.
Yeah.
So you
You
got to
need to
win
win.
a game.
You need to.
Yeah, you have to win. And they're 8-1 at home. That's actually where all of their wins have come from. So, uh,
Yeah.
we'll see what happens. On the road, it's been a lot rougher, right? I mean, but at the same time, hey, like I said, props to Houston because they've been
Yeah.
playing great, especially on the defensive end, which I thought they'd be better, but like a top 5 defensive team, I was not expecting. Same with the
Yeah.
Magic.
Yeah, they've been balling, both these young teams, and I love it. I feel like we're kind of seeing the turning of the tides where it's like, okay, now it's the young guys' turn. Minnesota's been balling. It just seems like the turn of the generation is definitely here. So I love it, and I'm here for it.
Yeah. So next up, I know you may not want to talk about it a whole lot, but
Oh
the
gosh.
Milwaukee Bucks
Uh,
131 over the Wizards
uh,
128. Um, this was a game that was in a way a little similar to the one that we saw in person. We saw the first matchup between these two teams in Washington,
mm-hmm.
DC. I think, the point spread was more like Milwaukee beat them by more, but it was still a
Yeah.
competitive game for a while.
Yes.
This game was basically down to the wire, right? Lopez was the leading scorer with 39 points, 6 rebounds, 2 steals, 3 blocks, 14 of 17 from the field, 4 of 7 from three. He had a good game when we saw them in person.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then also you look over, right? Lillard with 31 and 10, Giannis with 31 and 9.
They set a
It's
franchise
kind of
record or something, right? It was like
yeah,
most points scored between three people. I don't know what the stat was, but I know they did set a franchise record.
right. And this has kind of been the interesting thing about the Bucks, where it's like, when you look at the record, I mean, they just got a win earlier today over the Blazers, and it was a game where they were, they could have lost that one. They were getting blown out, and then they came back. And that's kind of the interesting thing, where like if you look at the record, right, they're 12-5, um, you know, 8-1 at home, which is pretty good. But then at the same time, every time you look up, they're in like a dogfight against a lot of these teams, or like, eventually they end up, pulling away because it does seem like the offense has been kind of like a lot for the teams to handle. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's so weird because like you can't complain about a 12-5 record, but at the same time, I don't know how to, I don't know in terms of like what I'm seeing from this team. Like I still feel like that they're very good, but at the same time, I don't know, it feels just kind of weird how like they have a lot of these games where it's like, why are they down by like 20 something to a shorthanded Blazers team? I know like over the course of a regular season, you're just going to have games where like the effort's not there, or you might just have like a game where it's like, all right, we just got to show up for one quarter and we can win. But like, and like again, the Blazers and the Wizards, because they're not great teams, like, yeah, like okay. But at the same time, like, the last time they played the Celtics, they were down by a big amount. They fought all the way back, and ultimately couldn't close it out. But I don't know. Like I said, I still think they're very good. And we thought they'd be very good, right? They have a top 5 offensive rating, right? They're fourth in offense, which is no surprise, right? Because that's pretty much their bread and butter. That's exactly what we expected.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they're still bottom 10 defense, right? Like they have the ninth worst NBA defense. Um, And I don't know. Like I don't I'm just not sure that that's sustainable winning formula. And maybe that can be patched up because again, Middleton has still been kind of up and down.
Horrible
I
in
think
my opinion.
yeah, I think he actually left this game injured, right? Yeah, this
Yeah.
was the game that he got hurt in, so he didn't even play a whole lot, and
Yeah.
that's kind of the other thing. But at the same time, you could also say, hey, we're 12-5, and Middleton hasn't even really, taken off yet. So that's the other part where maybe you feel pretty optimistic about it. So it's early, the record's good, they're winning games. It's just the process just seems so strange because I'm just not really used to a Bucks team where it's like, all of a sudden they can score at will. They could be down by 20 and get right back into it,
Right.
but at the same time, they can't really get stops. I guess they get just enough to get by because again, you're not going to be 12-5, without getting some level of stops at certain points in the game. But still, it just feels like between them and Boston, it just feels like Boston may be the safer bet. But then at the same time, right, Boston now has some injuries to deal with. And again, you're still relying on some other guys, some key guys that tend to miss games, like a Drew Holiday or Porzingis. We already talked about. He's going to be out like a week, so I
Yeah.
don't know, but at the same time, again, like I said, can't complain about the record, but it still feels kind of weird. But I
Yeah.
do think that the pairing between those two guys has been great.
Yeah, I think the pairing has been, very good, like you just said. I think it's a matter of, this is a brand new coach, brand new system, obviously brand new team, pretty much, because uh, not having Drew Holiday and not having some of the other defensive guys on the team clearly has been hurting them defensively. But I think it's a trade-off system where the offenses look great. They're scary. They, like you said, they can score at will. Giannis is unstoppable in the paint. Then Dame is pretty much on fire from the perimeter at all times, and it seems like they've always had like a relatively good third option between Lopez and Middleton. So I'm not really too concerned with them right now, but I need to really like dissect them and look at them, I think, a little bit further in terms of like, seeing when they play some real competition. Cause like I can't really say much about them playing the Wizards two times and like the Trailblazers, today. It's like I don't really know how to feel about that because I mean these are horrible squads, and it's like okay,
They
you
were
gotta
right with
win. Yeah, and
Yeah,
it's
they
like
were
you
right
gotta
with
win, and but you're also right there. I mean, you let the Wizards almost win this game against you, and that shouldn't happen with a team like this. But I do understand, I think the focus is offense for sure. So I think that's what their bet is going to be. But if they come up against a healthy Boston, in the playoffs, I just don't really see them beating that team. But I think there's room for them to grow. Maybe they do something at the deadline, and that wouldn't surprise me. Maybe buy in on a defensive guy. Maybe they pick up a guy like Caruso. I don't know, somebody who can get some stops,
Yeah.
but also provide some sort of offensive prowess. But whatever the case may be, I do like what I've seen from Milwaukee as a whole, but I do have to nitpick the defense because it
Right.
is interesting. Because I know I one of my hot takes a while ago was this is a bad team, and I guess bad is probably the wrong word. I would probably rephrase it and say they're on fraud watch right now because it seems like they're just liable to lose games. And if their offense isn't hitting, they're gonna lose. Simple as that because their defense is never on. Clearly,
You're right. Yeah, it's just again, the good news is that say even though Middleton has been kind of spotty,
hmm
Lopez I think has been pretty good for them, right? Because again,
yes,
he's kind of saved their bacon at times where
yeah,
he has a game like a game against the Wizards where he just I mean again that's kind of high end in terms of what you would expect, but at the very least the fact that one of the concerns that we had was he played great last year, but he is 35. And how many more really good seasons does he have left? I mean, obviously, because his game isn't really predicated on athleticism, right? Obviously, like, that game can age relatively well, but at the same time, you are relying on a guy in his mid 30s as, your primary rim protector at the
yeah,
same time. So, but either way, the fact that he's still playing at a very high level, that bodes well, right? Because like again, now that you don't have the guards, that can kind of defend at the point of attack, that's kind of the formula is you have Lopez and Giannis kind of eat up everything around the rim. Um,
right,
and if Lopez, and it's just the issue is now that means you're more reliant on a Lopez, and and you just know there's going to be like a couple of matchups where it may be a little bit more difficult, just because again he might be pushed out to the perimeter. But then that's where you can kind of move Giannis, into the interior. So we'll see. But like you said, not a whole lot to complain about because of the record, but you do, like you said, have to nitpick the defense because it
Yeah.
is something that is important and it is something that teams will look to try to take advantage of come playoff time. It's
Yeah.
not quite as relevant in the regular season, just because in the regular season, I think you can get away with, kind of like a shootout type of
Yes.
win, but
Yes.
in play, but even last year, right? Because we had a discussion. I think this was one of our first episodes last year where we talked about like the crazy offense and the crazy scoring in the
Yeah.
NBA.
That was
And
early.
then
Yeah.
what did we see in the playoffs? Once we got to the playoffs, it wasn't as much high
Yeah.
scoring. It
Yeah.
was
It
kind of
was bad. It was
yeah,
bad.
yeah, like and even the teams that were like the last team standing, right? Even a team like a Denver, like
Yeah.
even some of their games, they were like very low scoring games. Where we're talking about like low 100s or like 90s. I think they literally won the championship in a game where neither team scored 100 points, if I'm
Yeah.
not mistaken. So I mean, like,
Yes.
so, and that's something, and again, like that's kind of what the playoffs is about. It's going to be about matchups. It's going to be about can you take something away from, the other team, while still being able to take advantage of your strengths. It's like a chess match. So we'll see what happens because Milwaukee will have some things offensively against the other team to exploit because it's like, hey, you're going to have to try to slow down the two-man game of Giannis and Lillard, and that's not an easy task either
Right.
because now they have some good shooting around them as well. So that helps. So, again, we'll see. But, like you said, they've definitely made the trade off, for offense, right? Because this is
Yeah.
not a defensive oriented team, And again, the team they played against isn't really
That
a
was my
defensive
gonna be my
team
next
either.
point because
And that's
I can't take this game very seriously because at the same time the Wizards' offense I think has been decent. It's been good at times, but the defense is non-existent. If you look at the roster, Daniel Gafford is the only center. I mean, come on, man. We got Muscala, but he gets DNP'd pretty much every game. And then Gallinari is our backup center at this point. So yeah, of course
yeah,
Lopez is going to have 39 points. Of course Giannis should be averaging 40 against the Wizards. That's how I feel about it. So
yeah.
I can't take it seriously because the Wizards have no defense. So I'd expect the Bucks to cook up. But for it to be a 3-point game, they're automatically on my fraud list.
No,
Fraud
I mean,
watch.
yeah, with the Wizards, yeah, it was weird. I tuned into I think one of their games the other day,
Yeah.
and right when I tuned in, it was like a Mike Muscala like leaning, like sideways off the catch
Yeah.
three, and I was just like,
It's
what is the
BS,
process
bro.
for the team? And that's the other thing with the Wizards, where it's like, we mentioned their offense, they're 24th in offensive rating, so it's like,
Jeez, bro.
even
They
though
score.
even though yeah, like they can definitely, they have games where they go on scoring runs, but at the same time, then they have other games where like some of the guys just don't play that well. And then obviously the defense,
Yeah.
has been pretty brutal. I think right now they have the worst defensive rating in the NBA. Right. Yeah, they're
Deserved.
third. Yeah, right, right under the Pacers. Um so I mean that's kind of the interesting thing there is that, offensively the Wizards have been worse than I would have thought, even though they
Okay.
have like decent offensive players. And, some of that I think, goes to like, the process in terms of like, because we've seen them in person, a number of times. And it's like, it doesn't really feel like there's always like a real strategy there. Some
No.
of it's on the coach, some of it's on the execution of the players, some
Sure.
of it's just on the personnel as well. But
Agreed.
I don't know. Offensively, I'm kind of surprised at how inept it looks because I just feel like they do have some decent offensive players. Like Poole and Kuzma are solid offensive players. But at the same time, then you also have to factor in, well, now they're the number one options, and the defense is focused entirely on those guys as opposed to, like before when they were on their previous teams, where they're kind of just not necessarily another guy, but they're not like the primary people on the
Right.
scouting reports. Now, like the shots that Jordan Poole is getting, like now they're even more contested than they were before because it wasn't like his shot selection with the Warriors was necessarily the best,
No.
but now you're doing that and you're no longer playing alongside the same level of talent. And that's rough because again, like for a lot of guys, that's why it is very difficult, to be the best player on a good team because like even a guy like a Poole who we know has been a solid offensive player, there have been times where he struggled. And I think some of that also goes back to what we talked about with the Rockets where it's like, the structure matters as well, right? Because the Wizards, it just doesn't feel very structured. I mean, like, you
Hmm.
look at Poole's numbers, he's averaging 18 a game, but he's shooting like 39% from the field and 29% from three.
Yeah.
And,
It hadn't been. It
that's
hadn't been pretty.
yeah, and like I said, some of that is on him for some of the shots he takes, and then some of it is also just in terms of how the Wizards play. There's just no structure. It's just kind of like a lot of guys that just kind of show up and just kind of just do whatever they want. Like, we've seen it in person multiple times, and even that when they score, it doesn't look too bad, but then there's other stretches where it just looks absolutely horrible. And again,
Yes.
don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it, but it is worth pointing out because it's just it's just weird. And
Yeah.
again, like it just kind of goes back to sometimes it's you're not meant to be the best player on a team, and like that's not those guys' fault. That's the position they were put in because this is the first year of a rebuild, but eventually down the line, they're going to need to add some more talent to this roster, and that's kind of the hope for, the rebuild, right? Is that you're going to eventually be able to add some extra draft picks. Some guys you'll be able to kind of trade and get some guys back. So it's a process. It's a
Yeah.
process. This is year one. It's going to be rough. It's going to be bad. My thought process on the team is kind of like my expectations were low, but holy moly, it's even worse than I thought. Because I thought they might be able to get to like 24, 25 wins, but like
Yeah,
I don't know.
that's done.
Are they gonna even get to 20? Like,
They
I mean,
might
what
not
are
even
they?
get to 10, bro. Honestly, I think they're probably going to be in contention for, number 1 pick. I think that's what we're probably looking at with this team because at the end of the day, like other teams that are just as bad, I think there's a little bit more promise and hope. You can see the
Yeah,
vision. Outside of
right.
probably Detroit, I think that's the only I think Detroit and Washington are probably the two teams where it's like I don't see the vision at all. I can't trust the process. But like San Antonio, yeah, I can get behind that cuz I think they're going to draft, a point guard, a future franchise point guard to go with Wemby, and I think they'll be a-okay, and obviously they'll build on that. But like with the Wizards, are you really telling me, based off of the sample size that we have, Kyle Kuzma and Jordan Poole are going to be our franchise building blocks? Heck no. Somebody's getting traded, and like I've said multiple times, I think Bilal Coulibaly and Avdia and maybe Kispert are probably the only guys that are safe. I think, throughout the years, it's going to be a rotation of guys coming in and out until they could stock up some picks, hopefully like OKC, and get a real rebuild going because I think this is just abysmal. And I know it's horrible, and I'm a fan of the Wizards, but goodness gracious. And I've seen other podcasts, they've talked about it. It's scary. Like it almost becomes, I don't want to say like annoying to watch, but it makes you not want to watch the game
Right.
sometimes. Like I've thought
Yeah.
about going to some games in person, but then I'm like, do I really want to go and waste some money to watch us lose? But then it's like, okay, well, I'd be going for the other team. That's the kind of point where I think a lot of Wizards fans are at. Like they're watching these games probably for the opposing team. And that's a tough spot to be in considering, there is talent, I think, on this roster. It's just, it's not very cohesive. Seems like there's been a rift. I think Jordan Poole has been, I'm not going to go out and say a cancer, but it hasn't been pretty in the locker room, and the talk and the experiences that I think a lot of people have had haven't been that great. Um, so we'll see what happens, but yeah, Wizards are not looking too hot.
Yeah, that's a team to watch, I think, at the deadline because that's a team
Yeah,
that I could see shipping
and for
off
the
a number of.
draft.
Yeah, that's the team that I could see shipping off a number of guys, to maybe some other playoff teams because there's guys on there that I think could probably help other teams win,
Mm-hmm.
but probably not that team just because they just don't have enough.
Yeah,
And
and
like you
it's
said, like their goal eventually is to find that next franchise guy because, like you
yeah,
said, the Spurs they already have it. They
yeah,
already have their guy that they feel pretty confident and comfortable about in terms of the franchise.
yeah,
Even with a Detroit, like you said, it doesn't feel like it's great, but they still have some guys where I feel
yeah,
like
yeah,
those are building. Like a Cunningham or a Sore Thompson. You have some
yeah.
building dirt, Jalen Duran. You have building blocks
But they've
there.
been
You
there
don't
for like
have
7 years now. Like they've been
right.
so
Yeah,
bad for a long time. They've been in this rebuild for a while. That's why I was saying like the vision. I don't really, I can't trust it. But yeah,
right.
right now
Yeah,
I think they do have the guys for it. But we'll see what happens. But with the Wizards, it's like no, 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 no. Bilal is the
yeah,
only guy that I really feel good about right now.
yeah. Moving on, the Sacramento Kings 124-111 over the Timberwolves.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the Kings, again had a little bit of a slide. But now, it does feel like they're kind of getting into the groove of things again.
Yep.
Again, this was a game where it's like this you feel good about it, right? Because the Timberwolves have been playing great. As of today, I believe, this is Sunday, I guess, if you're watching it on Monday,
Yeah.
right? The Timberwolves are 12-4.
Yep.
After their win today over or blowout win over the Grizzlies.
Mm.
Um,
Imagine
but either
that.
way, with the Kings, right, you're not going to complain too much, right? They've had some games where, say like a De'Aaron Fox was out. Obviously Keegan Murray's been hurt, so they've kind of slid Chris Duarte in there. He had 0 points, but he did have 5 rebounds. Um, so I mean, that's something there, I guess. Kevin Herter, right, 10 points, 4 of 8, so that's fine. Harrison Barnes with a good game. Sabonis with a solid game. Malik Monk continues to play great off the bench. Again, this is a team where it's like, it's they are what they are, right? Like in a good way, because it is a good team. I still feel like come playoff time, we'll have to see what happens just because, again, last year in the playoffs, even though it was a very competitive 7-game series, right? Even more so than I think most people would have expected. So you give them credit for that. But you also just feel like, is their regular season success sustainable, right? Is it something that you can replicate in the playoffs? And, the problem has been on the defensive end, right? Where it's like, even although in the playoffs, their offense kind of took a little bit of a step back because they couldn't hit jumpers, like
Yeah.
they could in the regular season. But you can make up for the lack of shooting if you play good defense. And the schemes at times, I think, it seems like Mike Brown, because he's a defensive minded coach, the schemes aren't bad. They just don't have the personnel. They don't have the
Right.
type
Yeah.
of guy to necessarily do some of that for, right? Like you just like say like a guy like a Sabonis, you can't really run like the same defensive scheme that you could with like say like an AD or like a Bam
Right.
Adebayo. He's just
Yeah.
not that type of big man, right? He's not that athletic. He's not that mobile. So it's
Yeah.
just like there's certain things he can't do.
His wingspan
De'Aaron
isn't the
Fox,
largest either or longest. So it's like he just
right?
doesn't
Yeah,
have that frame or body build to, be
yeah,
an elite rim protector. I think he can get
right.
blocks, but he's not a rim protector by any means.
Yeah, De'Aaron Fox. He's the guy where it seems like he's definitely taken a leap
Yeah.
this season. Right? He's been playing great basketball. He's averaging what, 30 a game,
Through 10
six
games.
assists. Yeah, in 10 games, right? Which is kind of a small sample size, but still, he's been playing great. He's
Yeah.
shooting very well, right?
Mm-hmm.
48 from the field, 37% from three, right? That's the key part as well, because that's kind of the part of his game on offense, that has that's been kind of up and down for him, right? I remember, I think in the postseason against the Warriors, he shot relatively well from three.
Yeah.
I think it may have evened out towards the end because he had that
The hand.
finger injury,
Yeah.
whatever it was. But either way, right? Like if he gets that 3-point shot, going, and it's actually like a legitimate part of his arsenal, right? That makes him that makes him that much harder to stop, right? Because we already know he's incredibly fast, right? One of the fastest, if not the fastest player in the league. Um, and he can get off that floater in the lane. He can get off the mid range. So he's got some moves that he already can go to. And that's kind of the first step, to kind of having your game translate to the playoffs. Do you have some go to moves that you can go to whenever you want? And he has that. But then with the jump shot, if that continues to improve and and that 37% is relatively sustainable, if that stays, then you got somebody that's like, a dangerous player in the playoffs to match up against. Because again, we already know he can get past anybody and he's got a ton of moves to go to the, to get to the rack. Even again, he doesn't have to just drive to the basket. Like I said, he can do floaters, he can pull up. But now if that 3-point shot is there too, that makes him better and that can potentially make the Kings better as well.
Yeah.
Because again, if your best players play better in the playoffs, then that's another path for success as well. It's going to still be dependent somewhat on the matchup. There's going to be some teams that they're just not going to match up as well against. But if you can get an even better version of those two guys in the playoffs, plus maybe one other guy to play better than they did in the postseason, because you had a couple of guys that were really bad, like
Yeah.
Kevin Herter wasn't very
Yeah. He
good.
was horrible.
Barnes had a couple of games where he was fine, but he also had a couple of stinkers as well. And although I think he is what he is, but like I said, if you can get Fox and Sabonis to be better, plus one other guy, that's where you could potentially get over the top and be able to win a playoff series. And it's also a team that may be a trade candidate as well to pick up somebody. But either way, right, you'll take a win over the Timberwolves because they are very good.
Yeah, I feel like the Kings are one of those teams where it's like they hit you in spurts. Their offense is so sporadic that it can really just catch teams off guard. And I think that's one of their, strengths. Obviously, you talked about their defense being a huge weakness, and I think that's, pretty obvious. But, I feel like come playoff time, say Sacramento does match up against Minnesota or, another team, I feel like Sacramento is probably, a little bit more likely to catch, one of those teams off guard just based on, how quickly and how efficiently they're able to score the ball. It all comes down to consistency, though. I think they'll be looking for Kevin Herter to have, somewhat of a bounce back season. This season, he hasn't played, as well as last season, I don't think. But it has only been I think around 14 games for him. So he's averaging 43% from the field. I think you'd want that to be higher. And also the 3-point percentage is down 36 compared to the 40 from last year. So it would be nice if he was able to knock down a few more shots. But I think they've picked it up in some other areas. Like you
Yeah.
said, De'Aaron Fox, being as stellar as he's been, although he has missed some time. Regardless, him shooting the basketball like that, I think will translate to wins, and I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, because I will say this. even though I talked about their defense, it is better than it was last year, at least in
Absolutely.
terms right, like defensive rating, they're 16th, obviously where they were, towards the bottom last
Hmm.
year. So that's definitely a big improvement. But the offense, funny enough, has taken a step back. Now, again, some of that would be De'Aaron Fox missing some games, and then some of that also just some of the other guys haven't played as well.
Right.
So, like I said, I feel like they're probably about where they were last year. Maybe like they may be a little bit better, like maybe not in terms of the record, but in terms of like you said, I think if they match up against one of those other teams, that's where they could, like you said, maybe catch them off guard and maybe upset them. Because I think
Yeah,
that there are some teams that if you get an A+ version of Fox and Sabonis in the playoffs, you could win a potential matchup. Like
for sure.
I don't know, Minnesota may be tough, but at the same time, then you also have to factor in they are the number one defense. But come playoff time, let's say the Timberwolves miss a shot, and then they have to go down, and then they have to go play some transition defense against a team like the Kings,
Oh, it's
who will
over.
run you off the floor, right? That might be a problem because
Right.
that was a problem for them against Denver, right? Where
Right.
Denver, whenever they got a stop and they got the rebound and they would get out, Minnesota couldn't keep up. I mean, Minnesota's got great defensive personnel, right? They're also one of the top defensive teams, as we've already talked about before, right? They have a guy in Edwards where it feels like he's kind of taken a leap and is, getting it right into that tier of like, oh, this guy, can win you a playoff series now. Where like, last year you knew that he probably could, but he still had some holes. But now he's definitely gotten better. And like I said, part of that's the playmaking, where now he can use the threat of him being able to score to be able to make plays for others, right? Because we've talked about it where he had that game against the Warriors, right, where he kicked it out to Mike Conley, right, for basically the dagger three, and that's not a play he probably would have made last year, right? Because like he had a game, I think it was the play-in game, right, against the Lakers last year where he was just horrible, right?
Yeah.
And it was a game where like, it was close. And if he had, some of the stuff that he's doing now, if he was doing that in that game, they may have been able to pull it out, right? But
Right.
back he was more so just a scorer. And that was kind of the thing where it's like, hey, if you can do things other than score on the offensive end, right? Because it's not just scoring, there's other aspects as well.
Hmm.
Then that's where you can take the leap, right? Because we already know when he wants to, he can be a very good defender. He is a good defender. He's got the tools for it, and he's been able to do that, right? But with that playmaking, that's the next step, and it's there. And obviously with Minnesota, right? We can get into them now, right? They look
Sure.
pretty good as well, right? Obviously they lost that game, but they did blow out the Grizzlies, and their record's been great. Again, I'm still kind of interested to see what happens come playoff time because I do feel like there are some matchups where it may be a little bit more difficult for them than others. But if they actually can keep one of these top seeds, right, then that already will help because then that means you'll have home court advantage. Which for some teams it doesn't matter, but then for other teams it does. And I feel like a team like that kind of needs to be able to play at home because when they play well, their crowd kind of their crowd goes nuts for them. Which
Yeah. And they're
again,
seven
like
and one at home. So
exactly. And like, it's been a while since they've had like a team, like this. Right. Obviously a couple of seasons ago, right? They had a really good team. But it did kind of underwhelm in the playoffs. But it does feel like there's a real buzz, for them now in terms of taking that next step. I do think this version of the Timberwolves can win a playoff series.
yeah,
I don't
agreed.
know if they can come out of the West, but I think that I feel a lot better about this version of Minnesota than last year's because now it seems like you have a better version of Edwards. There's a lot more cohesion with the roster
Hmm.
as well, particularly with the Gobert and Cat pairing. I still feel like I said, there's going to be some matchups where it'll look a lot more clunky, but then there'll be other matchups where I do think they'll be able to take advantage.
Yeah. Minnesota, I think they've exceeded everyone's expectations for this season. I don't think, anybody expected, um, you know, Towns and Gobert to, come along at the same time as Edwards, taking the leap. I think that's the big thing. I think people expected, Towns and Gobert to maybe get along and, figure it out, maybe a few years down the line, but not in the same year. I think that's been the real key. And then, they've also had a good rotation of guys. I think, the guys off the bench have played fairly well. I think Naz Reid has been underrated this season.
Great.
So yeah,
Great.
he's been very good. So I think they, like you said, I think they have the tools to for sure beat a lot of the teams because I'm looking at the standings right now and it's like I think Minnesota could potentially beat OKC in a series as of late. I think it would probably come down to some maybe more experience in season teams. I think is where they would potentially struggle. I think they could even struggle against Phoenix. Maybe that a healthy Phoenix Suns. I think they could struggle against healthy Denver. I think they would struggle against even the Lakers. I just think that when it comes to playing guys with playoff experience who turn on. That switch when it comes to the playoffs, I think that's where they would potentially struggle. But as of late, I think they've looked stellar. Anthony Edwards has been balling on another level, and that's kind of what everything their whole season was kind of predicated on that. I think, if Anthony Edwards didn't and wasn't playing at the level that he's playing at currently, we'd be talking very differently about Minnesota, and we'd probably
They'd
be
be in the
talking
same
about them
spot.
like how we did last year.
Yeah, they'd be in the same spot as they were last year
Hmm.
if Edwards could take the leap, and that's what we talked about in the offseason, right? Because the Gobert and Towns pairing, it's definitely been better this year than it was last year.
Yeah.
Part of that is Towns is healthy and he's also playing, well,
Yeah.
right? Gobert has had a bounce back year as well, but the ultimate thing is, what are you getting out of Edwards in this season? And he's delivered on in that regard. And
Yes,
I
no
also
lie.
want to just to add some extra context. McDaniels was out in that matchup against the Kings, and he's been obviously been a big part of their defense as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, just props to Minnesota because again,
Hmm.
this was a team where I thought they'd probably be better in the regular season, just because I thought like, Towns missed so much time. If he plays more, they'll probably win some more games. But I'm still not sure about them in the playoffs. But it does
Right.
feel like they do. I think that they can win a playoff series.
Yeah.
Again, I would need to see who they match up against. But
Yeah.
I feel better about this version than last year.
Yeah, they're far from frauds. Like I feel completely different about them than I do, say like a team like Milwaukee. I'm confident in them, but like with Milwaukee, I'm like, yeah, they're probably gonna lose a series or something.
All right, so next up, this was one of the ESPN games, right? So this was Warriors Spurs.
Yeah.
Warriors win 118-112. Obviously, led by Steph, right, with 35 and 6. Did have 6 turnovers, but still 7 of 14 from 3, 11 of 20 from the field.
Hmm.
Um, they made a change in the starting lineup, right? Chris Paul had been starting while Draymond was out. I think Draymond is set to come back, I think within either the next game or so.
Joy.
Because it feels like it's been like 4 or 5 games, and I think that was how long his suspension was.
Yeah,
But
it's 5.
Chris Paul out of the starting lineup, and they put in Moses Moody. Did relatively fine, right? 9 points, 4 rebounds, 4 of 4, 1 of 1 from three. Um, Wiggins 10 points, 4 of 10, 2 of 4 from three, 4 rebounds, 3 turnovers. So I guess better. Um,
Not by much though.
yeah. Chris Paul, 5 points, 10 assists, 5 rebounds, plus 16, right? He was running the second unit.
Hmm.
Gary Payton, right, had a crazy block on
Yeah, that
Wembanyama,
was
right?
wild.
Where, yeah, again, he's very athletic. He's a guy that I think, obviously they like to have just because he's so active defensively. Um, I don't know. Like this Warriors team, it's so strange because again, they did get the win. They were up by a decent amount. It got very close towards the end, which I was kind of surprised by because I think at one point, they were up by like, 20 or something, I think early in like the late in the third or early in the fourth. And then I went to the bathroom and then I came back and all of a sudden there's like a minute left and it's like a 3 point game. And I'm like,
Yeah.
what the heck happened? And that's kind of been the story of the Warriors this year where it's like, for a lot of these games, it's kind of been very reliant on Steph and not much else. This was a game, Klay Thompson did have 15 and 6 assists. He was 3 for 11 from the field, but still 3 of 8 from three, which you'll take, and 6 of 7 from the line.
Hmm.
But like Wiggins, again, I just feel like this is, again, this wasn't a horrible game, but also the bar was like subterraneanly low because he was so bad early on in the season that a game like this, this is one of his better games of the year. And that's kind of just been so strange because at least with Clay, he's been up and down, but at the very least, I can give him the excuse of he's had multiple injuries and he's a little bit older. But with Wiggins, I don't really understand what the deal is with him in terms of why he's been so bad this season because, he's technically, age wise in his prime. I know he got hurt like right at the end of the playoffs, but like, that's not the same thing as what's going on now, right? He's been pretty durable. He's obviously athletic. And again, like I said, he's still pretty young. So I don't know what the heck is going on. The bench for Golden State has really been kind of the saving grace, right? When you have a guy like a Dario Saric on the minimum giving you, 20 and 7 in a game, 4 of 7 from three, right? That's kind of something that they didn't really have last year, right? Where they
Right.
didn't really have a stretch five off the bench. They were kind of doing the thing with Jermichael Green, but he just didn't really play very well for them. Um, but, again, like even the young guys, right? Like Kaminga had 12 in this game, but there's still other games where I feel like he's just been kind of disappointing. I feel like at a certain point he's just not going to be on this roster.
He's not.
Maybe I could be wrong, but like and also like some of it is like his role just seems just kind of odd where it seems kind of like at odds with how he wants to play. Like I feel like he kind of fancies himself as being more than just kind of like a role player, But that's basically what he's kind of asked to do from Golden State, which again, that's fine for Golden State, but at the same time, you're going to have to pay this guy eventually. And are you going to pay him, when you don't necessarily know what you're going to get out of him every game, right? Like they played Phoenix the other day. He started in the second half in place of Chris Paul, who had gotten tossed, and he didn't really do anything.
Right.
I mean, so that's just kind of been the weird thing. I'm just not sure how to feel about this team. Again, it's nice to be on the win column, but at the same time, they've kind of been struggling for a while, and they've had some stretches where guys were out, right? Like Steph obviously missed a couple of games. Draymond's obviously missed some time. But at the same time, even when they've had all their guys, other than that beginning part of the season, they just haven't really looked that great. And I just don't necessarily know what to expect from them. Obviously, they could go on a huge run and just kind of shut us up. But, at the same time, we were kind of expecting that last year, and it didn't really happen. Obviously, they made the big move in terms of swapping out Jordan Poole for Chris Paul. And I feel like he's been fine in terms of helping out with that second unit. But at the same time, it still hasn't really led to wins because they're still below 500.
Yeah, I feel you on that. And I don't know. Maybe we're coping, but the Warriors just might be done. But it's kind of hard to say that because I feel like anytime and every time we talk about the Warriors, we always talk about their championship contention aspirations. Anytime Stephen Curry's on the roster, you are in contention. As long as he's playing at the elite level that he's always played at, you have a chance at the championship no matter what. The problem is the guys around him, like you were talking about. Wiggins' efficiency numbers completely down the drain. Klay Thompson, I think he's been a little bit better as of late, but still, it's not crazy. I don't think I'm in the boat where it's like I think the guy is done, but maybe other people feel differently. I just don't think the roster is as constructed. I don't think they have a great chance at the play at like not the playoffs, but the championship right now. I think they'll be a playoff team, but I don't know if they'll even win a series. It just this team has such a weird feel to it. Like you said, it's pretty much Curry and nothing else. That seems like what it is every single night. And there's guys I think that have roles on here that could be better. I think Kaminga has potential to be better than what he's playing at right now because it's like the guy. I don't think he's one of the best 3-point shooters in the NBA by any means, but I think his athleticism is for sure there. But they don't really use him like that. I don't know. It's so weird. I'm not really sure what they're going to do about it because I feel like they've really messed up their young talent. They might have screwed themselves over by paying Jordan Poole and then the Wiseman debacle, Kaminga not really panning out. So I don't really know what they're going to do for the future. But for this season, I think they need to continue to just try and thug out and just win their must wins. I think if they win the must wins and the games that they're supposed to win, I think we'll be talking about them in the playoffs. But they just got to win, and everybody's just got to keep a level head. And Draymond's got to come back because I think that's been a factor as well. Not having Draymond does not help your chances.
Yeah, and that's
Winning.
kind of the weird thing, when you talk about a number of the young guys, because like again, Kaminga, you look at the counting stats, right? His points per game is up.
Hmm.
But outside of that, right, like the efficiency is way down. He was like, he was at 53% from the field,
Yeah.
37 from last year. This year he's at 45 from the field and 20% from three. That's just not
Mm-hmm.
good enough. Rebounding is a little bit down, right?
Hmm.
Shot blocking is down, fouls are a little up. It just and again, the minutes are it's almost the same exact minutes, right? Actually, the minutes are a little bit down, which is kind of odd because you would think if Draymond's not playing, like, and he's missed, a number of games, at
Hmm.
this point, because he even missed, the first couple of games because he had that injury, right? So he's only probably played in about half their games. Why is he still playing, fewer minutes? He doesn't even really start.
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of the disappointing thing, like you said. I think the rookies they've had have played
Oh
pretty
yeah. Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Um, in terms of Pajemski and Trace Jackson Davis, but at the same time, like, are those guys like really going to help you come playoff time? I just don't necessarily know about that. I think they can help them in the regular season, but I don't know if I necessarily would want to put all my hopes into rookies helping me win a title. Like I think you
Yeah.
still need some other talent, and again, like you said, they may have just messed up with the young guys because, like you said, Wiseman was the number 2 pick. I feel like most people at the time thought it was a good pick because I've mentioned it before, right? Everybody had questions about all of the top 3 picks in that draft, right? Like even Edwards, who people like now, there were a lot of people
It
that
was
were,
bad.
there were a lot of people that had some major questions about whether or not he would actually be good, even at the beginning of the regular season, right? Like a lot of people were like, I don't know about this guy.
Yeah.
Um, and then, same with LaMelo, same with Wiseman, right? Unfortunately, Wiseman, you know, seems like he's kind of the odd man out where like not only has he been the worst of the three, right? He hasn't even really played. Like he hasn't
Yeah.
even really played for Detroit, and Detroit is a bad team, right? So it's
Yeah.
like, that's kind of concerning there. And again, history tells us in the draft with a lot of, when you look at the top five picks or even like the top three, one of those top three guys is probably not going to reach, the
Yep.
ceiling that you hope for. Um, and some of that is on the individual players, and then some of that I think also, falls on Golden State, right? Because again, they went into the thought process, coming off the title year, right, with the two timelines idea, right, where thought process was we're going to contend in, kind of perpetuity, right, where we're going to be able to, have the current guys now, and then when those guys kind of start falling off, the younger guys will kind of step up, right? So I guess the thought process was take some young guys that are raw but maybe have high ceilings. But those guys just haven't reached,
No.
even really like that good of floors, basically,
Yeah.
right? Like Wiseman wasn't even playing a whole lot for Golden State when they were trying to win games, right? Moses Moody has been fine, but at the same time, like, he's the only one of them where it's like you feel decent about.
Sure.
Even Kaminga, right? I think there's a lot of people that like the potential of Kaminga, but
Yeah.
the potential just hasn't ultimately resulted or amounted to a whole lot. Because
He needs a
again,
change of scenery, in my opinion.
yeah, and that's the thing where I feel like these guys, like I feel like a Kaminga could probably still be a good player, but I just don't know if in Golden State, like you
Right.
said, if that's just gonna work. But at the same time, if you start getting rid of those young guys, then you really do get rid of some youth. You might get rid of some athleticism, and like you need that because again, that starting five has not been very good.
They've been
Um,
horrible, in my
yeah,
opinion.
yeah, exactly. And some of that is like, when they're fully healthy and they got all their guys, you don't have an athletic group, right? Like
Nope.
other than Wiggins in that starting five. And that starting five was great last year, but the league has gotten better and they may not match up quite as well against some of these teams this time around. Like, the year they won the title, even though you give them a ton of credit for winning the title, I'm not trying to say it was like a fluky year or
Right.
anything.
Right.
The Western Conference was not at all to the level of what it is now, right?
Oh
Like, I
yeah. It
mean,
was. It was weak.
that like that year, it was really only Golden State and I think it was Phoenix, right? Because the Phoenix had the best record. They
Yeah.
won like 60 whatever games. Those were the only two teams that I think we'd like legitimately looked at as winning a title. And Phoenix got eliminated by Dallas, and
Right.
I don't think we thought Dallas had any chance of beating the Warriors. So then,
No.
other than that, right? Like Denver wasn't anywhere to be seen because they had injuries. The Lakers were just a bad team. And then you look at all those the other remaining teams like a Memphis, who was good, but they were young and inexperienced. But now, you know, you have a lot of teams that are young and inexperienced, but they also have a lot of talent. And like on the on a random night in the regular season, you need talent. I think they'll still be able to win games, like I said, because Steph is Steph. And I feel like some of those guys will just pick it up because I just can't really believe that Wiggins is like this bad. Like I feel like he has to be I feel like there's got to be a level like where he's going to be better. But at the same time, like, that level, even if it's like what it was last year, that's not going to be good enough. Like, to me, you need Wiggins, the Wiggins that we saw the year they won the title. And I think you need a much better version of Clay. If you
Yeah.
don't have at least one of those, I don't think they have much of a shot because then once you get past that point, who else can you really reliably, look at to contribute, right? If
Yeah.
those guys are going to be this version of themselves, right? Because I mean, again, I mean, we can go over the stats again with Wiggins: 12 points a game, 4 rebounds, but then it's like 41% from the field, 25 from three, 56% from the line. That's just got to be better. Like that,
Yeah.
like there's no way this guy is that bad, right? If he's all of a
Yeah.
sudden just kind of gonna like revert back to kind of what we were seeing in Minnesota from like just an effort, just like a little bit.
Right.
And I know the counting stats in Minnesota were fine, but like the way we're talking
I know
about
what
him
you mean.
now than what we were talking about in Minnesota, where it felt kind of disappointing. But if the effort is not there and the numbers aren't there, I don't know what you do because, like I said, you need. Wiggins was an all-star the title year, and he's nowhere near an all-star right now. I mean, numbers wise, he kind of like a guy you'd expect off the bench, not as a starter. Like I
Sure.
said, I feel like that will get better, but you still need these guys to be like elite. And we talked about it in the offseason. I'm like, they really need Clay, to be a lot better than he was last year in the playoffs. Because I didn't really expect a Wiggins drop off. And because
Me
again,
neither.
I feel like he'll be better, but I thought like, he would probably just get back to somewhere, that he was at
I
before,
thought he
in
would be
Golden
better than the title year. Honestly, and I know that's probably
State.
a reach, but I really thought
And
he
you
would
might
actually be better coming off of the break and the time that he missed. I was like, oh, this guy's going to be in tip top shape, but it doesn't even look like he really cares.
Right, and you might have felt like that also where it's like, well, now he's playing with Chris Paul instead of Jordan Poole, so there's
Right.
gonna be more shots, and,
Mm-hmm.
like, he's good at making those shots, but, I don't know. Like I said, I don't know how to feel about the team. I'm not quite ready to count them out, because I mean, because it is Steph and it is the Warriors, but at the same time, it just doesn't feel that great. And in fairness, they've also had kind of a brutal schedule. But I don't know, like, just I feel like, the team from 2 years ago would have been able to withstand this type of stuff, but, like, it
Sure.
just hasn't felt great. But, I mean, in fairness, I don't feel like I was as high on this team going into the season as maybe some other people were.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, like, maybe regular season wins-wise, they might be a little better, but I still don't really feel like this team, like, is gonna come out of the West and also win the title. Like, I thought they could do it last year, but I'm kind of out on that at this point.
Yeah,
Like I said,
their
I'm not up
formula is
there.
too. It hasn't been updated.
Yeah, like, I'm
It's
not
weird.
gonna say there's a 0% chance because it's
Right.
not a 0% chance, but
It's low.
I don't know. I would be pretty surprised if they came out of the West and also won the title. I'd be very surprised.
I
Like,
can't
somebody
I
would have
can't imagine that.
yeah, like, somebody would have had to have gotten hurt or something. Like, I don't see it. This just does not feel like a championship team.
Yeah,
But again,
agreed.
at the same time, if you get guys playing better, maybe it does look like that. And maybe that's all it is. Maybe it's just some guys that are just playing absolutely horrible. But I don't know. I feel like this is a team where I think we got to see some type of trade. It
Yeah.
may not have to be a major one, right? Like, I don't think you have to trade Clay. And some people think they should. I don't think they're going to do that just because of, what he's meant to the organization. But
Yeah, and the
I feel
tenure.
like you could still make, like, some other type of trade and be okay. But
Hmm.
I don't know. Like, I mean, yeah, you won, but it is against the Spurs, and it was like, I mean, they did blow them out early on, but it got close. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I share a lot of the same sentiments, but like my problem is they don't have that guy who's coming off the bench or maybe even, gets inserted into the starting lineup sometimes and is pretty much guaranteed to drop 20 points. May not be the most efficient, but that 20 points will get you that win, so it's like they don't have that Jordan Poole guy anymore. They don't have the spark plug, the microwave. I think that's kind of the best way to describe Jordan Poole when he was on the Warriors. And that's the kind of thing that's interesting. I think they need to maybe go out and look for somebody like that. Like, who knows? It may say they picked up a guy like, Kelly Oubre. How would this team be looking, at this point? But regardless,
Well, they had him before.
yeah, they did have him before. You're right, but I don't know. I feel like you said, a move definitely needs to be made because clearly something isn't working, especially with Wiggins, somewhat with Clay. So I'm very confused on what they're going to do. Intrigued by it. Has piqued my interest, but right now I'm not, like you said, looking to give up on them per se, but I'm not confident in them at all.
And it's like you said, how things can quickly change because at
Hmm.
the beginning of the season, I think they were like 6-1 or something
Yeah,
like that,
they were good.
and now now they're below 500. I mean, they were 2 games below, before the Spurs
Yeah.
game, but
And
still,
that was mainly
it's
due to
just
Curry playing so well. Like, that's what
yeah.
it was. Like he was playing on a and still is playing well. That's the thing. But now the guys have just seemed to drop off the face of the earth, specifically Andrew Wiggins.
So yeah, and that I think, like I said, the main thing I feel like they just got to find is they got to find another creator. I mean, like
Yep.
again, like the Jordan Poole thing, obviously that's done and over with.
Yep.
But maybe there's somebody else, that you might be able to pick up. Again, maybe they might be a Zach Levine type of team. I
That's what
don't
I'm
know.
thinking.
I mean, I don't know for sure, obviously, because I'm not sure what the Warriors would be willing to give up. Because, like I said, I don't think they're going to give up on Clay. And I don't even
No.
feel like they're going to necessarily give up on Wiggins. I could be wrong, but obviously, if it's not those two guys, who else is it going to be? Right? Is it Chris Paul? I mean, like, I feel like he's actually been like relatively fine for them. But at the
Agreed.
same time, again, like I said, even though he's been fine in terms of setting guys up, it still hasn't led to wins because again, they're below 500.
Yeah.
So like,
They're in a
even though
debacle or
yeah, so even though
conundrum.
they've plugged up another, or plugged up a hole that plagued them last year, it's like, well, yeah, well now you have some other holes, and it's like
Right.
you got to solve those now because the whole last year was whenever Steph was off the floor, they were horrible. But at the same time, I feel like even the years they won the title, they still weren't good when Steph was off the floor. Now they're better, and they don't completely fall off a cliff, but at the same time, like the last few games, it feels like they have
Yeah.
sometimes gotten a little bit worse. I mean, the bench has been really good. But still, like I don't know. Like I feel like they still need some more.
Yeah.
Um, and then now the last in season tournament game, New Orleans Clippers, right, 116-106. With the Pelicans winning, right. This was a game where New Orleans was up. pretty relatively solid early, and then the Clippers came back into the game, but then the Pelicans ended up pulling away. Again, the Clippers closed with a pretty small lineup, and it's kind of hard to do that, with a guy like a Zion. Kind of charging down the lane, right? He finished with 32, 6, and 5. Brandon Ingram at 30, right? So those guys are starting to kind of figure out how to play together, which is good to see, right? Herb Jones, he had a really good game, right? Plus 22, 14, 4, and one steal and one block, right? Valanciunas putting in some work with 12 points and 8 rebounds. And then, some of the guys off the bench, right? Jordan Hawkins, who's continued to play well as a rookie, right? Alvarado's back. Didn't do a whole lot this game, but still, it's good to have that type of guy
Hmm.
back as a defensive guard. So it feels like they're starting to. It feels like something's kind of cooking in New Orleans now. Where now, as some of these other guys are coming back, now we're starting to see, like just a more complete roster. And again, McCollum's still, not back yet. Trey Murphy's not back yet. So once those guys are back, and guys are slotted a little bit differently, right? Because Dyson Daniels, he's played well, but he's not going to be he can't really start for you if you want to go really far. Or maybe he can, but at the same time, like, it does feel like now the depth is starting to come back. And that combined with Zion and Ingram both playing well together and figuring that out has led to the Pelicans, playing really well.
Yeah.
So you're starting to feel better about them, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Pelicans have gone up a tier in my opinion, especially with them being healthy. And that's the problem is like the healthy Pelicans and the injured Pelicans are, two completely different teams. And I think you can say that for a lot of teams in the NBA, but specifically the Pelicans, I think it hits them a lot harder than other teams for some reason. And I do understand it. But yeah, Zion has definitely been on the, way back up to what we know that he can play. The field goal percentage has been going up ever so slightly, and also the numbers, efficiency, they look good. Ingram, like you said, looks good. So it seems like they figured some stuff out, and I looking at this game, I don't like the Clippers still. I'm still not confident in them, but I it's so odd because I feel like they're in inverse positions. New Orleans, I love what they have. I think they've got a squad that seems to be. I know we've used this word about 10 times now, but very cohesive. Everybody seems to play and feed off of one another. Whereas, the Clippers, it's like, okay, we've got four guys that could do pretty much the same thing. ISO gods, they can get to the bucket, however they want. But at the end of the day, are they willing to sacrifice? Can they really spot up? Can they do other things without, the ball in their hands on offense? No, not necessarily. So it's like I do like what New Orleans has put together, and I think this is a team that we'll probably see climb the ladder. I think they'll be one of the teams where, say Golden State is, just not that good. I think, they'll continue to rise. I'm not going to say they'll make it to the Lakers, but I think they also have the potential to knock Houston down a notch as well. So I do like what the Pelicans have done so far.
Yeah, but it's just again, the main thing is health, right? Because I believe the other day, right, they ended up losing a game. I think they were up for most of the game, and then they ended up losing it, and that was a game where Zion was out due to rest. And again,
Yes.
that's kind of the thing that we've talked about, where it's like, how many games are we going to be able to get, out of Zion and Ingram together? Because they haven't played a whole lot. Actually, the trio of Zion, Ingram, and McCollum has not played much together at all. And they've been together for what, basically three. This is the third season, because Zion didn't play at all when they first got CJ McCollum. And then obviously, Zion didn't play a whole lot last year.
Right.
And now McCollum, right, has been out, with the, the lung injury, the collapsed lung, hopefully he can recover from that.
Yeah.
I think they're saying he's improving. He's still not ready to come back yet. But, if he can come back and, play well, because I think McCollum has overall played pretty well this season,
Yeah.
in the game he's been able to play in. Um, like you said, that does raise New Orleans' ceiling. I still feel like, you got to figure out what you're going to do, in terms of like, the bigs. Because again, it just feels like, with Zion and Ingram, I still don't feel like they're that great defensively. And I feel like you'd like to have like more of a natural rim protecting center outside of a Valanciunas. But I
Yeah.
also still feel like at the same time, like, Valanciunas is a good player. So he's not like a guy that you can just kind of like toss aside and just kind of just throw somebody else in there.
Right.
Uh, and I feel like with New Orleans, they're just not a team that I'm gonna expect to like, go all in on the luxury tax. Maybe they will, but I feel like they're gonna do like some type of cost cutting maneuver if they're like close to the tax. And somebody's gonna be, the victim of that. But again, at the same time, the team is getting better. Those two guys are playing well together. It's just
Yeah.
all about can they need to get the guys back. And then, like you said, when you look at the Clippers, The other night they got, they blew out the Mavs. The Mavs, lost Derek Lively, so he's going to be out for a little bit.
Hmm.
He got hurt in that Lakers game, right? I think where he, fell on his back, after like a lob attempt,
Yeah,
right? And it looked pretty painful, but luckily, it doesn't seem like it's an injury that where he's going to be out for like forever. So that's good
sure.
because he's
Yeah,
been very important to Dallas, and that could be
extremely.
maybe one of the reasons why they lost. But either way, it is kind of interesting with the Clippers because it's been kind of up and down. They got some wins with Harden out there. As of late, they've been better, obviously since, that horrific start. Although in fairness, there was nowhere to go but up because they had lost like 6, 7 straight games.
Yeah, you're not
But
wrong.
at the, but like you said, at the same time, it still doesn't feel like that they're gonna be able to be in that, final four mix of teams because
Nope.
even though again you're getting some really good performances out of Paul George, right? Like we've said it before. I think this season he's been the best of their main guys.
Yes.
Like because Kawhi at times has been okay, but then there's other games where like against the Mavs he was really bad.
Yeah.
And it seems like at times like it's just kind of like a weird fit because again, you know, Kawhi's, is a guy that likes to have the ball in his hands. Paul George likes to have the ball in his hands too, but also I think because he's just much more used to being a catch and shoot guy, like he can kind of fit in and just kind of adapt, I think, easier to his role. Whereas like Kawhi, I think it's kind of been like an adjustment to kind of playing, with a guy like a Harden that has the ball in his hands a lot, and it's, Westbrook has the ball in his hands a lot, but it's still like but it's also just like a different type of thing from Harden,
Yeah.
where with Harden, you kind of have to adjust to like a new system, like a new style of play,
Yep.
you know, just because, and that's kind of the sacrifice you make when you trade for a guy like that. But like you said, can they figure out, other ways to contribute, right? But it's just like that's kind of not what some of those guys are, right? Like Kawhi, because he's been a superstar with the ball in his hands, he's not going to usually be like the guy, to kind of like set screens and then like, act in the short role or, like be a guy that just, sets like an off ball screen for somebody else. Like that's just not really what he does. And, that's
Right.
not his fault. Most superstars typically aren't necessarily like, dirty work guys or, guys that kind of make those other types of plays. They're, their best because their best traits are normally what they're able to do with the ball.
Mm-hmm.
And there are other guys, right, that are, much better at it, like in terms of like, distributing or creating offense for others, like, say like a LeBron or somebody like that. But again, that's kind of the adjustment and that's the sacrifice you make when you trade for a star. Is you have to figure out how to make it work. They've tried to do some things, right? Like where they sent Westbrook to the second unit and they started Terrence Mann. That seems like that's been relatively fine, relatively successful. Um, but at the same time, I still feel like there's gonna have to be some other extra piece that they need. Um, again, I think, in terms of that forward depth, outside of your starters, the only other, forward is PJ Tucker. And I just feel
Right.
like you probably need just like a little bit more, even though I think Tucker's been okay. But again, you gave up all your forwards to get Harden, so now you have a lot of guards. I feel like, Bones Highland, he might be the guy that they might end up moving on from, which is kind of interesting considering when he was traded to the Clippers, it felt like he might be a guy that might play a lot for them.
Yeah.
But now that you have Harden, you don't really need
Nope.
Bones Highland, especially if Westbrook is going to be your backup point
Right.
guard. So, that's kind of the guy that I'm looking at where like, that's probably who they're going to have to move, along with maybe some of those other young guys. Because I don't feel like they're going to trade Zubac. Um,
No, they
Plumlee's
can't.
still there. Obviously he's going to be on the team, I'm assuming. We'll see, depending on how they feel between him and Tice. So maybe it might be Plumlee, if they can find somebody. But I feel like they still need another piece. I feel like as currently constructed, it still feels like it's not quite good enough to be able to win. Because again, outside of Zubac, you have no real size. And like, again, we saw it against Denver where again, they had, all their main guys outside of Zubac close the game. And it's like you can't play small against that team.
And they
Because,
play them on Monday. So good luck.
right. So, and again, now they've changed the lineup and the rotation. So we'll see if that makes a difference. It might. But still at the same time, like they've had some better games, but like I said, there was nowhere to go but up because they had lost 6, 7 straight in a row. So I feel like it is getting better, but I still feel like they need a little bit more.
Yeah, and it's like I feel like they're getting better, but too slowly. That's the problem because they were already in such a big hole. I'm not gonna say they're a team that's probably going to miss the playoffs, but they'll be a low seed for sure. And that's only if they actually do win a lot of their games, and that's been the problem because looking at Harden's stats, it hadn't been great. It's on like around 14 points on 44% from the field, it's like, okay, that's not the Harden that we know. And then Kawhi's been down efficiency as well, 20 points and then 45 from the field. Like we said, Paul George has looked like the only good thing on the roster that I really like so far outside of Westbrook at times. Um, and that's the problem. I feel like they just need to figure out the identity. I'm not sure what you can really do with that though, because you've got 3 4 guys that are all very good at their positions, but require that the rock in their hands, and it's like the basketball isn't big enough for all those guys to share it. It'd be different if we were talking about maybe a older Paul George or like a older Kawhi, but we're talking about guys where this is supposed to be their year and they're sitting at 6 and 8. I just don't really know what they can do to offset this bump in the road. Maybe they made a mistake trading for Harden. Who knows? But as of right now, I don't really know what to say. And to lose to New Orleans, I think that's also a little bit disappointing, considering the talent that you have on your roster. I know that New Orleans does have some talent, but you would kind of expect Paul George and Kawhi to kind of pick this team apart. But it is what
New
it is.
Orleans is also missing guys, so
Exactly. So it's like I don't really know what to say about the Clippers. It seems like they'll be one of those teams where they'll probably be up and down the majority of the season, and then maybe next season, if all those guys are even there, maybe they'll have a more cohesive year. But for right now, it's not looking too good. Doesn't seem like Harden's the kind of guy where you can just plug and play him.
yeah, that's just not who he is, and that's kind of the thing is that offensively they've been a little underwhelming, right? Because again they're averaging 112 a game, which isn't terrible, but again like you said, when you consider the talent on the roster, it should be better. Again, like the record is 7-8, so like they're only a game below 500, and they've been able to kind of climb out of the hole that they were in before.
Right.
Um, and again, like because we're not like 40, 50, 60 games in, it's a lot easier to kind of get back to that, compared to what it was, compared to, whatever. But like at the same time, it just feels a little underwhelming, right? I mean, like,
Sure.
because again, like, points per game, they're 19th, right? Which again, like that's just not good enough. And that's kind of the thing, because you would have assumed that the offense would kind of be, you know, not necessarily their bread and butter, but like you would think it would be significantly better just because of the talent you have, right? Like, because I think the thought process is like you would have just assumed, like, yeah, defensively, because you have Kawhi, because you have Paul George, like you probably should be good. And like defensive ratings wise, they actually have been good. They're top 5 defense in terms of defensive rating.
Right.
But, offensive rating, they've been, just mediocre, right? 17th in offensive rating. That's not going to get it done.
Yeah.
Which is
No.
again, and I think that speaks volumes to, like you said, that it's kind of hard to plug in. Not all those guys are plug and play players, right? I think Paul George is, but I'm not necessarily sure if Kawhi, and I definitely Harden is not a plug
No.
and play
No.
player. I think Kawhi may be a little easier to fit in, because he can, because he is comfortable like being able to catch and shoot, even though he does like to play 1-on-1.
Mhm.
But I think Harden's the one that's like it's very difficult to just kind of fit him into a roster. But
And
at the
those have
same
been the
time,
two that I think I've had the most problems with watching, in terms of Kawhi and
right,
Paul George, or not Kawhi
yeah,
and Paul George, Kawhi and James Harden. Literally those
right,
two.
because yeah, because like I remember in that Houston game, right, there was stretches where like Harden was kind of able to pick the Rockets defense apart, playing in the pick and roll because that's what he likes to do.
Mm-hmm.
But then there were other times where Kawhi was trying to take guys 1-on-1, and it just he couldn't get by him, and he was just kind of forcing up a lot of junk.
Yeah.
So it's just like and again, those are the growing pains. But like I said, in fairness, it is getting better, right? They are 7-8. They're not in the same hole that they were in before. They're 11th in the Western Conference, but it's an 11th where it's like if you win a few more games, you can get back up there.
Sure.
Maybe like a top 3, 4 seed. That's probably out the window just because losses wise, they're kind of a little back, from some of those other
Yeah,
teams.
they'd have to go on an
But
insane streak, and I don't think that's possible right now.
right, like say Minnesota, they've lost 4 games, right? I guess once you get to like 6, 7 seed, right, they've only lost like a couple more games, but at the
Hmm.
same time, they're also wins behind, right? Like Minnesota's won 12 games, they've only lost 4,
Right.
right? The Clippers won 7, they've lost 8, so they would have to win. A number of games, and you would also, like I said before, you'd have to expect that those teams would also lose as well, and that's the tough part because
Yeah.
again, it's like it's not just you winning your games, you have to hope that the other teams ahead of you lose. And they could, because like some of those teams will play each other and they'll, end up taking wins away from one another because
Right.
it's the Western Conference and they're all solid teams. But
Yeah.
at the same time, if you're the Clippers, you got to win your own games as well. But like I said, when you're that far down, you gotta hope for some luck, and that was kind of what made that final stretch of the regular season last year really crazy because there were a number of teams where like we had stretches where we thought some of those teams might be done, right? Like I remember like the Lakers when LeBron hurt his foot and he was out, we kind of assumed that that team might just be, completely done in terms
Right.
of like they got no shot now. Like, and they were still like, 12th or 13th in the Western Conference, right? We thought, a team like a Utah, right, might be able to get in there because, they were playing well and then they fell off.
Hmm.
Because we had, and then remember like the last few days of the regular season, right? There were like all these mathematical matchups where it's like, if this team wins, then this team is this
Right.
seed,
Yeah. Yeah.
the other seed. And then I think because of the final day was so crazy, like there was like a team that ended up being a seed that you wouldn't have thought because of like the point differential or something
Right.
crazy like that. And it feels like it's shaping up to be that once again.
Yeah.
Mainly
I
in the
think
Western
it's going to
Conference.
be a tight
I guess
race.
yeah, I guess in the East, like you do have a number of teams record wise that are very close to each other. But I also feel like in the East we have like a little bit better sense of like which teams are actually like, really good.
Yeah.
Whereas like some of the other teams like we know that like a team like Detroit or Chicago or the Wizards is just probably or just not going to be that good.
No,
Right? Like
they're done.
we know that the Raptors are probably just going to be mediocre, right? Like we know that the Nets are probably going to be like, an average team. But
Right.
then, like you look up at the top, we know the Celtics will be really good. We know the Bucks and the Sixers will be pretty good. It's just again like for a lot of these teams, that's the health factor plays in as well. Because with the Clippers, they're 7-8, but that's with Kawhi and Paul George playing. I'm pretty sure every single game this season, right? This
Yeah.
isn't like years past where like say I think it was 2 seasons ago they missed the playoffs, but Kawhi didn't play at all because he was recovering from the ACL injury.
Right.
Or like last year, right? They were like the 5 seed or whatever, and Kawhi and Paul George both missed time, and Paul George was out for that series. But
Yeah.
this time they've played every game and they're still below 500.
Which is
But
crazy.
yeah, exactly. That's because again, like we talked about some of these other teams, like even with the Warriors, they're below 500, but they can at least say, well, Steph has missed some games, and some of these other guys have missed some games as well. But like, I mean, the Clippers again, your two best players have played every single game, so that's kind of weird. But again, I do feel like it does feel like that they're gonna be better, but I'm still not necessarily certain, like you said, if they're gonna be up at the top. It's
Yeah.
kind of gonna just come down to like, are these other teams at the top actually legit? Right? Like are Minnesota and Oklahoma City, they're at the top of the West right now, but are they actually the two best teams in the Western Conference? We'll see, you know?
Yeah.
So
It's going to be a tight race, I think, and we probably won't know until the very end. That's kind of how I'm feeling about it.
right. Yeah, so obviously, we have more in-season tournament games on the way right over the course of next week. We're getting closer and closer right to that December stretch where they're actually in Vegas, right?
Hmm.
We're not there yet. Obviously some teams have already been eliminated. Some teams have some scenarios where they're not quite eliminated yet, but they're probably not going to be in that, main group because they haven't been quite good enough. Like I think there was like a mathematic explanation about like, even though the Warriors beat the Spurs, they would have to like, bank on like I think winning a game by like a ridiculous amount of points, in
Right.
order to stay alive. And that's kind of the wild thing with the point differential, right? Like I think when the Raptors and Bulls played, right, DeRozan had an issue with Siakam taking a three. I think it was Siakam or somebody at the end of the game, right? But it's to add on to the point differential, right? Like with Booker and the Suns and the Grizzlies, right? They ran up the score because they were also trying to make that point differential, stand out, right?
Right.
Because if they had like had a game, like say the Portland game where like, it was kind of close towards the end, right?
Hmm.
Then they may not have been able to be in the position to be in Vegas.
Right. And
But,
that shows me that they actually care, which is great.
right, and that's the cool part about the in-season tournament is that, again, it does feel like the players, do care. Some people, I've heard online, there are some people that feel like it's, you know, doesn't feel that much different. I don't know. I feel like there's definitely a level of, intensity to these games that we don't always see. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe it might just come from, your perspective. I think some of it also has to do with some people feel like the courts are very disgusting. I do think some of the courts are very disgusting. Not all of them,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, like, the courts don't really like change my perception of the actual game. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like,
Yeah. And I
like
think most of the nationally televised games have been very competitive, at least from the ones that I've watched. So it's like
yeah,
I do understand, some of the, local ones maybe not being as competitive, but yeah, for sure. I think it's a great idea, and never really understood the hate because I think I can see the difference. I think there is some sort of, care in the world about, who goes to Vegas because it is
I think
bragging rights and these guys are ultra competitive. I think people forget that.
Yep. Yeah, I think so too. Like I said, neither of us had a we both
Yeah,
liked it because we both felt that there needed to be a little bit more juice in the regular season.
right,
Because it feels like the NBA's regular season, has had the reputation the last several years that it hasn't meant anything,
right.
right? And worst of all, that that players don't even care about it, right?
Yeah,
Because
and
like
people
we
don't watch.
because in the past, we've seen like, guys sit out of games when they're pretty healthy. We've seen, a lot of the regular season matchups, other than a handful, don't really draw in like a ton of views.
Right.
Um, but now you have some stuff to play for. You have some stuff to care about. You have some real stakes,
Yes,
and
sir.
that helps.
Yep.
So again, that's kind of the next step in terms of making the regular season more impactful. I mean, there's still like a limit to like we saw last year there were some teams that had some great regular seasons, but it didn't mean anything in the playoffs, right? Because we saw a ton of upsets last year.
Yeah.
So that part probably isn't going to change, but I also think some of that also just goes back to the parity, where like now, the one seed, there's not as much of a difference now between say like the 3 seed and the 6 seed, right? Whereas say like maybe even like 5 years ago, it was a huge difference because there were some teams, like 5 years ago where they're in the playoffs and like if they were playing today, they wouldn't even be anywhere near there, right? Like some
Yeah.
of those teams, how did they even get there?
And that I think that goes to say a lot about last year's playoffs because an eighth seed went all the way to the finals. So it's like okay, and that hadn't been done in a long time, or if ever. Was it ever?
It's happened before, but
Okay.
not a whole lot.
Yeah.
Knicks did it in '99 because they were the 8th seed.
Yeah.
And I think that was also without Patrick Ewing, who had
Okay.
gotten hurt.
Yeah. So it's like just look at the history books. It doesn't happen very often. So it is very interesting to see what the regular season does mean in comparison to the playoffs. I think that's really what it comes down to.
So I mean, yeah. So that's kind of been the main gist of what's been going on here.
Yeah.
Because again, that's kind of the big story. In the NBA right now is the in-season tournament. And also like it also gives us a chance to talk about some of these teams in certain ways, But again, like, continue to let us know, what your thoughts are,
Yeah.
in terms of, you know, how we're talking about these things, and
Yeah.
do you agree or disagree? Not a whole lot of news and rumors, I guess, to get into today. We have a couple. We'll start off, with a smaller one, right? So there was so it's it's about Zach Levine, just the idea of like, the market is limited,
Hmm.
according to some teams. Some reports from NBCS Chicago, Bulls struggling to find a deal for star. Mid rumors also from the Miami Herald, Levine not being pursued by the Heat. Again, I think the issue with him is the contract.
Yeah.
Um,
It's a monster.
because he makes a ton of money. Yeah, you have
Hmm.
to give up a lot relative to what he is as a player.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't think a lot of teams may have the infrastructure to do that because there's some teams where like we could cobble together, like a bunch of contracts that we don't really need and turn it into Zach Levine,
Right.
maybe give him a couple of picks, but not every team can do that. Some of
Right.
those teams they want to keep those guys and they're not necessarily like all that into the idea of giving up that stuff for Levine, right? If
Right.
it was like maybe some other guy, you might want to do it but maybe not necessarily for him. Because again, I think he's a good player,
Me
but is
too.
he worth giving up, like a ton of stuff, and then like contract wise, he's gonna probably be like, your second most expensive player, or something like that. And that means you're investing a lot into him, and is that worth it? That's the
Yeah.
danger. Plus, also, the injury history is a concern as well. Because again, I do think he's very talented, and I think there's a lot of teams he could help. We talked about him in a previous episode before. Um, so you can check that out in terms of like,
Yeah.
which teams we thought, he'd be good to go to. But at the same time, I'm just not surprised that there's not like a big market, right? It kind of reminds me, sort of the Beal situation where it's like, again, it's a guy that's a good player, but is it a guy that a lot of teams would want to just give up a ton of stuff for? With the Suns, you gave up what was it? It was
Chris Paul.
DeAndre Ayton. Yeah, it was Chris Paul. My bad. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was Chris Paul. Right, and like you don't feel as bad about it just because of where Chris Paul is at this point in his
Hmm.
career. It was mainly the picks that you feel the worst about. But,
But the no
same with
trade clause is what was really going on
yeah,
there.
and
They
then
were forced to do that thing.
right, yeah, and you're right. The other factor was that he had a no trade clause, right? So that means he dictates the
Yeah.
term deals, the terms of the trade.
Right.
With Levine, he doesn't have a no trade clause, but he still makes a ton of money and he's still not necessarily like in that elite tier of players
Right.
where like, if he's on your team, you automatically go from whatever you were, to like a title contender,
I've
right?
always thought
Like,
of him as more of a third option, and that's kind
right.
of what he was in Minnesota. So I don't know. I
Yeah,
get
but
it,
the
but
issue
I also don't.
Yeah, and the issue is it's a very expensive, costly third option. And some teams will be I think, may have the ability to do it. And then other teams maybe not. But I also feel like, again, if people didn't know, like December 15th and I think January 15th, those are the dates where you could start trading some of the guys that you recently signed. And that's usually why we also don't see a lot of trades early on in the season
Right.
because, a lot of players you literally cannot trade, right? Like
Right.
I know Levine's had a bunch of like Laker rumors or whatever, but most of the guys on their roster they either re-signed in the offseason or signed. So I'm pretty sure the only player that they can legally trade that makes a lot of money right now is LeBron, and they're not doing that. So
Yeah,
like,
that's the LeBron for Levine W trade. Yeah, no, not gonna
yeah,
happen.
so like,
I'd
yeah,
say
so
it's
like,
probably a deadline thing. If Levine does move, we gotta wait till the deadline.
right, yeah, so that,
But
yeah,
we'll
and that's
entertain the rumors, I think.
yeah, and that's kind of where I'm looking at, where it's like it's not something that I think is gonna happen like anytime soon, just because
Yeah.
again, teams are gonna see what they have, and then look at guys, and then hey, if it doesn't work, we'll move these guys, and then if it does, we'll keep these guys. So
Right.
it's gonna be it's gonna be a back and forth thing. We're gonna continue to hear a lot of rumors, but I don't see anything happening anytime soon because I just don't feel like teams are ready to make that decision just yet.
Yeah.
Another thing about the Thunder, according to Mark Stein, I don't see Thunder making win now trade. I don't see that as being a target for them. Things are going really well the way it is. I feel like that makes sense. This was a team that I think some people thought, over the course of the offseason might make like a big move because they have so many picks. I just
Yeah.
don't feel like they're quite there yet. They have a lot of really good young players on the roster. Obviously that means you also have some guys that you could potentially trade, but at the same time, I don't feel like they're quite at the point to make like a win now move where we're trading for a star. And again, kind of like with the Levine thing, I just don't think that situation has risen just yet. Like we haven't really heard anything other than Levine, other than the Bulls situation. We haven't really heard a lot about any other stars, on other teams that are middling teams wanting out just yet. And
Right.
that's because we're still at the early point in the season. And like I said, a lot of teams just can't make those trades because they can't trade, the guys that they recently signed.
Yeah, and it's like for me, I think OKC is fine where they are, and they've
Yeah.
got the picks. I think they can use that to their advantage maybe down the line. Who knows? I know, those picks do have an expiration date. But I think, they are movable, but just not right now. I think it's way too early, way too soon. And, they've been on fire. So I do think, that they've constructed a team that has surprised a lot of people. And, I don't think that they need to do anything. I think they're fine right where they are.
Last but not least, we're not going to get into it a whole lot just because
Mhm.
there's, we don't have a whole lot of information about it, but we do have to mention it. Obviously, if you hadn't already heard, you've probably seen it all over social media, right? The
Yeah.
NBA is investigating, the Thunder guard Josh Giddey, for allegations involving, a potential inappropriate, relationship with a minor.
Right.
Um, so, obviously, again, if you've been on social media, you've kind of probably seen what's been going on. That's actually, I think, if I'm not mistaken, how this kind of got started.
Yeah. All over
Where,
TikTok, all over Twitter.
yeah, yeah, it was all over, everything. So, we'll see what happens. Again, the investigation is underway. So, they're gonna have to figure out a lot of stuff, and then they'll go from there. It's just not a whole lot I can really say because without the investigation being done, I can't really say too much.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not a great look, but again, like we're not there yet where like we, know everything about the situation. So we'll just kind of have to go from there. It seemed like, the other night he was playing. So it's not like, they're not sitting him out. They haven't really talked about it. They haven't commented on it, at
Yeah.
all.
He's gonna
Within the team.
continue to play through it.
Yeah,
They've
so
even
we'll see
said
what
that.
happens. Yeah, so we'll see what happens. But like I said, I kind of want to refrain from like saying a whole lot just
Yeah.
because again, we don't know a whole lot. And this is the type of thing where like, you know, it can stick, pretty much forever.
Yeah.
Even if it's like a scenario where like he ends up coming out okay and nothing actually happened, it can still stick around. So I just kind of want to hesitate, to say a whole lot until we actually know what happens. But
Yeah.
again, if you've been on social media, you know everything that's been going on.
Yeah.
You've seen it before, so we know what's up.
Yeah, you
In
can
terms
look
of
that
like,
up on your
what
own time. We won't talk about, the minute details, but like you said, it's pretty much career ending. If it is true, but if it's not, it's just brand damaging. It's going to be hard for him to bounce back from that because I mean, we can take a look at guys who've done some egregious things in the NBA, and fans and NBA Twitter does not let that go ever. So it is unfortunate that he's found himself in this situation, and there is an investigation. But I hope the NBA resolves it, and I hope the outcome is along the lines of justice. I don't really know what to say because I don't know the situation fully. I just know what I've seen on social media. And like I said, you can go and look that up yourself. We're not going to talk about it. And we're not really going to, indulge in the social media rumors.
So yeah, and like you said, people don't forget, right? Because the Josh stuff, when
Hmm.
that came out, and that initially spread through social media, and then they had the investigation, right? We're still talking about it. Obviously, then we're still feeling the effects of it, right? Because he's still out. He's not
Yes.
playing right now. He's not going to be back, until Christmas or whatever. But
Yeah.
again, once the NBA puts all that stuff out, we'll have more, information to talk about because then they'll be able to put everything out. We'll know what happened, and then we'll know where to go from there, depending on the outcome, of the situation. So
Yeah.
we'll see. But again, we had to mention it because obviously it's been going on everywhere.
Yeah, and it's a
People have been
big
talking
deal. It
about
also
it. Yeah,
impacts, the Oklahoma City Thunder, or can
yeah,
potentially impact them, because they're
right.
such a great team and they've been on fire this year. So, losing Giddy potentially, I think would be very damaging to that team.
Yeah, and like it's interesting because he's had kind of a down year this
Yes.
season. At the same time they've been propped up by other guys, right? Because Chet's been awesome.
Yep.
Shay's been awesome. So they've got other guys, but like you said, either way, if it's a situation where he's in trouble and he's got to be away from the team for quite some time, that's that would be pretty damaging, I think, to
Yeah.
Oklahoma
That'd be
City.
horrible.
It's not like a season ending thing where it's like, well, our season is over, but at the same time, it also would hurt because it's a promising young player on your team that would just be gone. But again, we won't know. So we're not going to dwell on it too much until
Yeah.
we figure out stuff. Because again, we can save those conversations for once that stuff is done and we know more
Right.
about it.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty much it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, it was a decent amount of stuff to talk about. So let us know in the comments, your thoughts on, the in-season tournament. Have you liked it so far? What have you thought about the teams we've been discussing? Which teams do you feel like are legit? Which teams do you feel like are, on quote unquote fraud watch? Let us know because again, we appreciate the interactions. On the shorts, on the videos, and again, continue to like, comment, and subscribe. We continue to appreciate all the support, and we'll see you Friday.